The air in the room of requirement hummed with latent energy, thick and coppery like the moment before a storm breaks. Moonlight, fractured by the stained glass high above, painted shifting mosaics across the stone floor, crimson, sapphire, emerald, colors that seemed to pulse in time with the low thrum emanating from the mirror. Hermione stood before it, breathed shallow, fingers tracing the intricate pattern of chalked runes at her feet. They spiraled outward from the mirror's base, etched with powdered moonstone and dragon's blood ink, each symbol a precise calculation, a whispered command to time itself. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of what she was attempting. This wasn't mere scrying. This was a resonance bridge, designed to vibrate the fabric of magical space across temporal boundaries, anchored by the mirror's innate reflective paradox. She adjusted her wand grip, murmuring the incantation under her breath. The words felt heavy, ancient, like stones turned over in a long-buried crypt. Tempus speculum, aeternum echo, resonantia per umbram. The mirror shimmered, not with reflection, but with depth. Her own face wavered, then dissolved into fog. Beyond it, a corridor emerged. Familiar, yet wrong. The torches burned lower, their flames a sickly green. The tapestries depicted scenes of conquests, not history. And the silence. It wasn't the usual Hogwarts quiet. It was the hush of something watching. Hermione leaned forward, pulse quilting. "It's working," she whispered. The runes beneath her feet glowed faintly, a network of silver light. She reached out, fingers hovering just above the glass. A cold draught snaked around her wrist, carrying the scent of Deb's stone and old parchment. Then, a flicker. A figure in black robes, tall and still, standing at the far end of the corridor. His face was in shadow, but the posture was unmistakable. Controlled, predatory. She jerked back. "No, that's impossible. The experiment only allows passive observation." Her voice cracked. The runes flared brighter, responding to her spike of emotion. The mirror rippled like water. The figure turned. Dark eyes met hers, sharp, intelligent, and utterly devoid of warmth. Tom Riddle, young, handsome, terrifying. "You're not supposed to be there," she breathed. A smile touched his lips, slow, curious. He stepped forward, one hand rising to touch the glass from the other side. "And yet," his voice echoed, layered and smooth as polished obsidian, "you brought me into focus." "How?" Curious. Panic flared. She tried to sever the connection, chanting the reversal, but the runes burned hotter, fusing into the stone. The mirror's surface peeled open, like a wound, not reflective anymore, but a gateway. The cold intensified, pulling at her. She stumbled, her fingers scraping the frame. The last thing she saw was Riddle's hand reaching through, not toward her, but into her world before the room twisted, the colors inverted, and she was falling through glass that felt like ice and fire. She landed hard on cold marble, gasping. The air tasted stale, laced with incense, and something metallic, fear perhaps. She pushed herself up, heart hammering. The room of requirement was gone. She was in a grand hall, but not hers. The banners were black and silver. The portraits watched with narrowed eyes, and standing over her, robes untouched by the fall, was Tom Riddle. "You've come through," he said, voice quiet, almost reverent. "Not a vision, not a dream. Flesh and blood from where?" Hermione scrambled back, wand raised, but it felt wrong in her hand, as if the magic here resisted her. "I didn't mean to. I was studying resonance." "Studying?" He tilted his head, studying her in turn. He tore a hole in time to study, a laugh low and dangerous. "How very Gryffindor." "Tell me, Hermione Granger, what year did you leave behind?" She froze. "You know my name." "I know many things," he said, stepping closer. "And now, it seems, I know you." His gaze held hers, not with malice, but with a terrifying hunger. Not for power, not yet, but for understanding, for truth. "Welcome," he murmured, "to my world." The air in the room of requirement tasted like burnt copper and old parchment, thick with the residue of spells gone wrong. Hermione's fingers trembled against the cracked surface of the mirror, its silver frame pulsing with a sickly, opalescent light. She had found it buried beneath layers of enchanted rubble after the final battle, half buried in the ruins of what was once the Ravenclaw common room. At first it had seemed inert, just another relic of a war long past. But then, late one sleepless night, the glass had rippled like water, and in its depths, she saw a castle that looked like Hogwarts, yet wasn't. Turrets leaned at impossible angles. The sky above it burned violet, and shadows moved too quickly, too deliberately, across its courtyards. She had spent weeks researching, cross-referencing obscure texts on reflective magic, time echoes, and interdimensional rifts. The theory was thin, almost poetic, and at moments of great magical trauma, reality fractures and reflections of what might have been, or could still be, surface in mirrors, pools, dreams. This mirror, she believed, was a breach, a door, and now standing before it, wand clenched in one hand and the other pressed flat against the glass, she could feel it breathing, a low hum built in her bones, rising from the floor, vibrating through the soles of her boots. The mirror's surface shimmered, then cracked, not with sound, but with silence, as if the world had paused to listen. A hairline fracture split the glass, then another, spreading like frost across a window pane. Light poured from the fissures, not white, but deep and shifting, like oil on water. "No," she whispered. "Not yet. I'm not ready." But the mirror didn't care. It exploded outward in a wave of silent force, not shattering, but unfolding, peeling back like a curtain. The air turned viscous, dragging at her limbs as she stumbled back, but an invisible hand seized her, cold, relentless, and pulled. She screamed, but no sound came. The fall wasn't through space, but through layers of time, of memory, of something older than either. She saw flickers, Harry's face contorted in grief, the forbidden forest burning, a diary with a blank page that soaked up ink like blood, then darkness, and a single voice, young and smooth as polished stone. "Who are you?" When she landed, it was on cold flagstones, and the air smelled of damp stone, and something else, ozone, like after a storm, but sharper, laced with decay. She lay there gasping, her robe singed at the edges, her wand still clutched in a white-knuckled grip. Above her stretched a ceiling she knew, and yet downed. The great hall, perhaps, but altered. The house banners were wrong. Slytherin's green hung heavy and dominant, embroidered with serpents that seemed to rise in the dim light. The enchanted sky above was not stars, but a slow swirl of bruised purples and grays, like a wound healing poorly. She pushed herself up, her body aching, as though she'd been pressed through a sieve. Footsteps echoed, measured, unhurried. She turned. He stood at the end of the hall, silhouetted by torchlight, tall even at what she guessed was 17, his robes immaculate, his posture perfect. His face was sharp, elegant, untouched by the madness she knew would come, but his eyes, dark, intelligent, utterly still, locked onto hers with the focus of a predator. "You're not supposed to be here," Tom Riddle said, his voice quiet, almost curious. "No one comes through the mirrors, not alive." Hermione swallowed. Her mouth was dry. "I didn't mean to. The magic. It tore open." "Magic doesn't tear," he interrupted, stepping forward. "It obeys, it serves. If it brought you here, it was meant to." She shook her head. "You don't understand. I'm not from this time. This place, it's wrong." His lips twitched, not quite a smile. Wrong, or simply honest? He reached into his robes, and she tensed, but he only withdrew a small silver locket, hanging from a delicate chain. He held it up. Inside, a mirror, no larger than a shilling, reflected not his face, but hers, pale, frightened, and behind her, the faintest shimmer of a second image, a girl with wild hair and defiant eyes, reaching. Tom tilted his head. "Fascinating. The mirror shows you two things at once. Tell me, which one is real?" The air tasted different here, older, somehow, as though time itself had thickened into something tangible. Hermione stumbled forward, her fingers dragging across the cold stone of the corridor wall, the texture unnervingly familiar, yet subtly wrong. The torches flickered with a greener flame than she remembered, casting long, wavering shadows that danced like phantoms across the flagstones. She blinked, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps, as the weight of realization settled over her like a sodden cloak. This was Hogwarts, but not her Hogwarts. The tapestries lining the hall were different, woven with scenes of ancient duels and forgotten founders, their faces stern and unfamiliar. The suits of armor stood at sharper angles, their visors down, as if guarding secrets. And the silence, oh, the silence was the worst. No distant laughter of students rushing to class, no chatter echoing from open classroom doors. Just the whisper of her own footsteps, too loud in the stillness. She clutched her wand tightly, the wood warm against her palm, but even that felt alien. She had cast the spell perfectly. Tempus refringens, a forbidden incantation she'd unearthed in a crumbling tome beneath the restricted section. A spell meant to peer through time, not step into it. And yet here she was. A door creaked open down the hall. Hermione froze, pressing herself into the alcove beside a statue of a long-bearded wizard whose eyes seemed to follow her. Soft footfalls approached, measured, unhurried. A boy stepped into view, tall and pale, his black robes tailored with an elegance that spoke of quiet confidence. He carried a book beneath one arm, its cover embossed with silver script she couldn't read. His hair was dark, combed back with precision, and when he turned his head slightly, she saw the sharp line of his jaw, the calm intensity in his gaze. Her breath caught. Tom Riddle, but not the man she knew from whispers and nightmares. Not the dark lord with serpentine eyes and a voice like dry bones. This was a boy, 17 perhaps, his features unmarred by time or cruelty, and yet there was something in the way he held himself, in the stillness of his expression, that sent a shiver down her spine. He paused, frowning slightly, as if sensing something amiss. His eyes scanned the corridor, lingering a moment too long on her hiding place. "Who's there?" he asked, voice low, clear and devoid of urgency, as though he already knew the answer and simply waited for confirmation. Hermione didn't move, couldn't. Her mind raced. If he discovered her, if he questioned her, what would she say? That she was a student from the future? That she knew what he would become? He took a step forward. Then a voice called from farther down the hall. "Riddle, Professor Dippet wants to see you." Tom turned, his expression smoothing into something polite, almost pleasant. "I'll be there in a moment," he replied, his tone effortlessly courteous. He didn't look back as he walked away. Hermione let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her heart hammered against her ribs. That had been too close. She stepped out of the alcove, glancing down the hall in the direction he'd gone. The name Riddle echoed in her mind, tangled now with the image of that composed face, the quiet intelligence in his eyes. This wasn't just the past. It was a version of it, warped, reflective, like peering through a glass darkly, and she was trapped inside it. She needed answers. How had the spell gone wrong? Was this truly 1943? 1944? And if so, how long could she survive here without being discovered? More importantly, how would she get back? But even as she asked herself these questions, another thought crept in, unbidden. What if, in this broken mirror of time, things could be different? What if he could be different? The air in the corridor tasted different here, older, heavier, laced with the scent of beeswax and damp stone, as though time itself had settled into the walls like dust. Hermione pulled her cloak tighter, the fabric coarse against her skin, a far cry from the soft wool she remembered. The torches flickered with a greenish tinge, casting long wavering shadows that seemed reluctant to stay still. Hogwarts was hers, once, but this version of it watched her with silent suspicion, its corridors rearranged just enough to disorient, its staircases moving with a sluggish, deliberate rhythm, as if anticipating her misstep. She had found the library first, of course. It was her anchor, her compass in any world. But even there, something was askew. The books were bound in darker leather, their titles etched in a script that curled too tightly, like secrets unwilling to be read. She had opened one, The Principles of Bloodline Purity and Magical Lineages, and snapped it shut just as quickly, her fingers trembling. That wasn't a book that belonged in her Hogwarts, not really. She turned a corner and nearly collided with him. He stepped aside with a grace that felt rehearsed, almost feline, his movement so precise it seemed choreographed by silence. His robes were immaculate, the slithering crest pinned just so, and his hair, dark, combed back with military precision, caught the torchlight like polished obsidian. But it was his eyes that stalked her breath. Black, yes, but not empty. They were too alive for that, calculating, curious, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Lost, are we?" he asked, voice smooth as river stone. low enough that it seemed meant only for her. "I don't believe I've seen you before. And I know every face in this school." Hermione forced her spine straight. "I knew," she said, choosing the lie like a shield. "Transferred. Temporary placement." His lips twitched. Just once. Neither a smile nor a sneer, but something in between, something that suggested he knew she was lying and found it amusing. "How fortunate for us," he said. "I'm Tom Riddle, prefect, and as it happens, rather good at helping lost things find their way." She met his gaze, refusing to flinch. "I don't need help. Everyone needs help, Miss Granger," she supplied, watching him closely. "Hermione Granger." He repeated her name once, slowly, as if testing its weight. "Hermione, uncommon, like you." She felt the compliment, like a blade wrapped in silk. "And you're uncommonly certain of yourself." "I'm certain of facts," he corrected. "And the fact is, there are no transfer students at Hogwarts in 1943, not with ministry approval. So either you're lying, or you don't belong here at all." Her pulse jumped, but she kept her face still. "Maybe I just like surprises." He tilted his head, studying her like a puzzle he intended to solve. "You're not afraid of me?" "Hasn't that worse," she said, and it wasn't a lie. A flicker, something like interest, passed through his eyes. "Have you? I'd like to hear about that sometime." "I doubt it." He stepped closer, just enough that the heat of him cut through the corridor's chill. "You carry yourself like someone used to, being the cleverest person in the room. But here, Miss Granger, cleverness has a hierarchy. I'd hate for you to miscalculate your place in it. And I hate for you to underestimate mine," she shot back. For the first time, his smile reached his eyes, cold, brilliant, dangerous. "We'll see." A bell chimed distantly, its toll echoing through the stone like a warning. He didn't move, not yet. "You'll come to me," he said, almost gently, "when they're ready to stop pretending. You're too bright to stay hidden for long." Then he turned, robes swirling behind him, and walked away without looking back. Hermione stood frozen, her breath shallow. The air felt charged, as though the world had shifted on its axis, and no one had told her. She knew then, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones. This was not the boy who would become Voldemort. This was worse. This was him before the mask. Rain lashed against the high-arched windows of the library, distorting the flickering torchlight into trembling streaks across the ancient stone walls. The air smelt of damp parchment, and something sharper, ozone perhaps, or the residue of a spell gone slightly awry. Hermione stood at the edge of the restricted section, fingers trembling as they hovered over a book bound in what looked like blackened dragon hide. She hadn't meant to come here, but the mirror, the cursed, beautiful mirror, had whispered to her in dreams, showing her pages she'd never seen, spells she couldn't name, and a version of Hogwarts that remembered her, though she had never lived within its walls. A footstep echoed behind her, soft, precise. "You're not supposed to be here, Miss Granger." She turned slowly. Tom Riddle stood in the shadow of a towering bookshelf, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight, like polished onyx. He wore his prefect's badge with quiet pride, but there was no warmth in his posture, only stillness, like a predator measuring distance. "And yet," he continued, stepping forward, "you found your way past the wards, not just once, 3 times this week." Hermione swallowed. "I was looking for something." "Of course you were." He tilted his head, studying her the way one might study a rare, possibly venomous insect. "The question is, what? The Ministry keeps tight control over banned texts. Even here in this distorted school, some rules hold." She met his gaze. "Not all knowledge is dangerous, just because it's forbidden." "No," he said softly, "some knowledge is dangerous because it's true." A silence stretched between them, filled only by the drumming of rain. Then he moved, smooth, deliberate, and plucked a book from the shelf beside her. It was titled Temporal Fractures and the Soul's Echo. She hadn't seen it before, but the moment she laid eyes on it, her chest tightened. "You've read this?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Tom smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "I've read everything in this section, but you reacted to it, as if you recognized it." She hesitated. "It's similar to a text at Hogwarts, in my time. Your time." He said the words slowly, tasting them. You keep speaking in riddles, but I think I'm beginning to understand. You're not from here. You're not from any time. I'm from the future, she said, and I need to go back. He laughed, low, rich, utterly devoid of mirth. The future, how quaint. And what kind of magic brought you here? I wonder. Not time-turners. Those are child's toys. No, this was deeper, older. Hermione tightened her grip on the edge of the shelf. It was an accident. A mirror. Ah. His eyes lit up. The mirror of Erised. But not as it is, as it could be. She stared at him. You know of it? I've studied every relic in this castle, and I've seen it. Changed, reflecting not desire, but fracture, a doorway. He took a step closer. You stepped through, she nodded. And yet, he murmured, you don't fear me. That's what fascinates me most. Everyone fears me, even the professors tread lightly. But you look at me as if you're trying to solve a puzzle. Maybe I am. Then what do you see? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she studied him, the sharp line of his jaw, the intelligence burning behind his gaze, the absence of cruelty. For now, I see someone who could change everything, she said at last. For better or worse. Tom's smile deepened. And which do you think I'll choose? That's what I'm trying to find out. He turned the book over in his hands, then offered it to her. Then read, learn, but be careful, Miss Granger. Some truths are doors that, once opened, cannot be closed. She took the book. The cover was warm, almost pulsing. And what about you? She asked. Aren't you afraid of what you might learn? For the first time something flickered in his eyes. Doubt, curiosity, before it vanished behind the mask. No, he said. I'm not afraid of truth, only ignorance. The air in the corridor turned cold, the moment the torchlight flickered. Hermione paused, her breath a pale wisp in the sudden chill. The castle had changed in subtle ways since her arrival. Slightly askew tapestries, staircases that led to forgotten landings, a silence that wasn't empty but watchful. She had spent nights tracing the library's restricted section for clues, fingers brushing spines etched in forgotten runes, until she found a single sentence buried in a crumbling grimoire. The mirror walks not upon glass, but stone that remembers. Now, standing before a nondescript stretch of wall near the abandoned charms corridor, she pressed her palm flat against the cold stone. Nothing. She whispered the incantation she'd reconstructed from broken syllables. Vidira subtegmine, ostenda vium. A faint tremor ran through the wall like the pulse of a sleeping beast. Then, with a low groan, a seam split open, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling into darkness. The descent took longer than it should have. Time warped here, as if the deeper she went, the further she slipped from the world above. The air grew thick with the scent of damp earth, and something older, ozone perhaps, or the ghost of magic long since sealed away. The walls shimmered faintly, not with torchlight, but with veins of blue-green energy that pulsed in slow rhythm, like a heartbeat beneath the castle's bones. At the bottom, a chamber unfolded, vast, domed, its ceiling lost in shadow. In the center stood a circle of standing stones, each taller than a man, carved with symbols that shifted when she looked at them directly. They weren't runes she recognized, not from any era she knew. They moved, rearranging themselves like living script. Between the stones, the floor was inlaid with a mosaic of silver and obsidian, two serpents entwined, their eyes set with stones that glowed a dull, molten red. Hermione stepped forward, careful not to break the circle. Her wand trembled in her hand. Lumos, she whispered, and the light flared, but the shadows didn't retreat. They resisted, clinging to the edges of the chamber like something alive. You shouldn't be here. She spun. Tom Riddle stood at the base of the stairs, his silhouette sharp against the dim glow behind him. He wore his prefect's badge, but his robes were dark, nearly black, and his eyes held none of the practiced charm she'd seen in the great hall. Here, in this place, he looked, unmasked. I could say the same for you, she replied, voice steady, despite the hammering in her chest. This chamber predates Hogwarts, he said, stepping into the circle. The stones hummed as he passed. It remembers what the founders tried to forget. Magic that doesn't obey rules. Magic that chooses. She studied him, and you've known about it all along. "I've sought it," he corrected. "For years, but it only answers to those who've seen both sides of the veil." His gaze flicked to her. "You're not from this time, are you?" The question hung in the air, sharp as a blade. She didn't answer. "You carry the scent of another now," he murmured, stepping closer. "Like ozone after lightning, like a spell half-remembered." He reached out, not touching her, but tracing the air near her wrist. "The mirror didn't bring you here by accident. It called you. And you," she asked, "why are you drawn to this place?" His expression darkened. "Because it speaks the truth. Not the lies of destiny or prophecy, but the raw current beneath. It shows what magic wants. Not control, not order. Power, evolution." He turned to the central mosaic. "This isn't a prison. It's a cradle." A low vibration rose from the stones. The serpent's eyes flared. Hermione felt it in her teeth, in her bones. A resonance that tugged at something deep inside, as if her very blood remembered this place. "If you wake it," she said, "you won't control it." Tom smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Perhaps, but neither will anyone else." And in that moment she saw it. Not the future Dark Lord, but the boy who had once believed knowledge could save him, who still believed if only he could grasp enough, understand enough, he might outrun the darkness inside. The stones began to chant, not in words, but in tones. Ancient, terrible, beautiful. She reached for his hand. "Tom, stop." Rain tapped a slow, insistent rhythm against the stained glass windows of the headmaster's office, each droplet catching the dim light like a shard of fallen sky. The air smelled of old parchment, beeswax, and something faintly herbal, dried sage perhaps, or valerian root. Hermione stood before the wide desk, her fingers curled around the strap of her satchel, the leather cool and familiar beneath her touch. Across from her, Armando Dippet adjusted his spectacles, peering at her over the rim with weary, watery eyes. "You are not like the others, Miss Granger," he said, his voice softer than she expected. "Not in manner, not in bearing. Even your magic feels displaced." She swallowed. "I've always been taught that magic adapts to the witch, not the other way around," she replied carefully. The words tasted like half-truths. Dippet leaned back in his high-backed chair, the wood creaking beneath him. His gaze drifted to the row of silent portraits lining the walls, former headmasters and mistresses. Their eyes closed in feigned sleep, though she suspected they were listening. "You speak like someone who has seen more than one kind of Hogwarts," he mused, "as if you've walked halls that no longer exist." A chill threaded its way down her spine. "That's not possible," she said. "Not in this world." But he only smiled, a thin, sad thing. "And yet, here you are. No record of your enrollment, no family name in the registry. You appeared in the East Corridor during a storm, drenched in muttering spells. No fourth year should know." He paused. "The castle let you in. That means something." She didn't answer. The mirror had not spoken, not in words, but it had hummed when she touched it, a resonance deep in the stone, as if the castle itself recognized her displacement, or her purpose. "There is a student," Dippet continued, lowering his voice, as if the walls might carry his words, "whom I would advise you to avoid." Tom Riddle. Hermione's breath caught, just slightly. Her fingers tightened on the strap. "He is exceptional," Dippet said, choosing the word as if testing its weight. "Brilliant, destined for great things, they say. But there is a darkness in him, a stillness where warmth should be. I have watched him grow, year by year, and I tell you now, he does not connect. Not truly. He observes, computes, controls. And you, Miss Granger, you are drawn to complexity. I see it in your eyes." "I'm only here to learn," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "To understand this place, then learn from others. From professors," Mary thought, or Slughorn. "From your peers, not from him." Dippet's hands folded together on the desk. "He does not need a friend. He needs no one. And those who get too close, they tend to vanish from his life, as if they were never there." She thought of Tom's voice the other night in the library, low and precise as he explained the theory of magical entropy, of the way his fingers had hovered over the page, not quite touching, as if afraid of leaving a mark. of the flicker in his eyes when she corrected his translation of an ancient word. Surprise, yes, but also something warmer. Curiosity, maybe even respect. "He's not what you think," she began. "I do not claim to understand him," Dippet interrupted. "But I know ambition when I see it. And his is not the kind that builds. It is the kind that consumes. You would do well to remember that." A silence settled between them, broken only by the ticking of an ornate brass clock on the mantelpiece, one that showed the phases of the moon instead of hours. "I'll consider your advice, Professor," she said at last. "That will have to be enough," he replied, though his eyes did not soften. "But know this, the past is not a safe place to linger, and some doors, once opened, cannot be closed." The air in the restricted section hung thick with dust and silence, undisturbed for decades save for the soft rustle of parchment and the occasional scratch of a quill. Moonlight spilled through the high-arched windows, painting silver stripes across the ancient spines of books bound in cracked leather and etched with forgotten runes. Hermione knelt beside a low table, her fingers tracing the delicate filigree of a Sumerian incantation etched into a brittle scroll. Her breath caught as the symbols shimmered faintly under her touch, reactive magic, dormant but not dead. "You're holding it wrong," came a voice, smooth as polished obsidian. She didn't startle. She'd felt a mentor, more a shift in the air than footsteps. Tom Riddle stood behind her, his posture relaxed, hands folded behind his back. He wore his school robes with an elegance that bordered on arrogance, the prefect badge gleaming dully in the low light. His dark eyes studied the scroll over her shoulder, not with impatience, but with a hunger that mirrored her own. "If you press too hard, the ink destabilizes," he continued. "This is written in crushed moon petal and phoenix ash, volatile when agitated." Hermione sat back slowly, letting him step forward. He knelt beside her, careful not to brush against her, and reached out with 2 fingers, hovering just above the surface. The symbols flared gently, then rearranged themselves into a new configuration, a spiral leading inward, like a labyrinth. "It responds to intent," he murmured, "not force." She watched his face, the sharp angle of his jaw, the way his lashes cast faint shadows when he blinked. There was no smirk, no mocking glint, only focus. "You've seen this before?" "Once, in a dream," he said, and then, as if catching himself, added, "Or perhaps a memory that isn't mine." She studied him. That was the strangest part. The moments like this, when the mask slipped, and she saw not the man who would become Voldemort, but a boy tangled in questions he couldn't answer. A boy who read every book twice, not for mastery, but for meaning. "Why do you care?" she asked softly. "About this? About any of it?" He turned his head, meeting her gaze. "Because the world is built on lies, Hermione. History is written by the victors. Magic is hoarded by the fearful. But mirrors don't lie. They show what is, and what might have been." He paused. "You know that better than anyone." She looked away. He was too perceptive, too close. They worked in silence for a time, pulling volumes from shelves that hadn't been touched in years. A grimoire bound in shadow wolf hide, whispered when opened. A codex of Paracelsian alchemy glowed faintly blue when exposed to starlight. Tom translated a passage in High Atlantean without hesitation, his voice low and precise, each syllable resonating like a struck bell. "You're fluent in Atlantean?" she asked, unable to hide her awe. "My mother's family had connections," he said simply, "before they were forgotten." She wondered what he left unsaid. How much of him was shaped by loss, by rejection? How much by choice? At one point their hands brushed, reaching for the same tone, a treatise on dimensional echoes. The context sent a jolt through her, not magical but human, warm, real. He stilled, then pulled back, but not before she saw it, the flicker of something uncertain in his eyes. "You believe the mirror is a prison," he said after a long pause. "But what if it's a test?" She frowned. "A test of what?" "Of alignment. Of truth." He leaned closer, voice dropping. "What if it shows not the past, but the self? What if you're not trapped here, Hermione?" "The called?" She searched his face, looking for deception, for manipulation. But all she found was a boy who had spent his life searching for answers in the dark, and who, for the first time, seemed willing to share the weight of the search. Outside, the clock tower chimed 2, Somewhere deep in the castle, a ghost sighed. The candle flames bent as if listening, and between them on the table, the mirror fragment they'd recovered, pulsed once, soft, golden, like a heartbeat. The dormitory was silent, save for the rhythmic ticking of an old brass clock perched upon the mantel above the fireplace. Moonlight spilled through the tall arched windows, painting silver streaks across the stone floor, catching the dust that swirled like forgotten spells in the air. Hermione sat up in bed, her fingers still curled around the edges of a borrowed copy of Theoretical Mirror Mechanics and Ancient Charms, its pages brittle with age. She had been reading for hours, trying to decipher the faint looping script of a long-dead Hogwarts professor, but her eyes burned with fatigue, and her thoughts moved like mud. She set the book aside and rubbed her temples, then glanced toward the full-length mirror in the corner. A relic, ornate and foreboding, framed in blackened silver serpents, whose eyes glinted even in the dim light. It hadn't been there yesterday. She was certain of it. The mirror belonged to another time, another place, perhaps even another world. And yet, it stood there now. She rose, bare feet pressing into the cold stone as she approached it. Her reflection greeted her, tired and wide-eyed, hair a wild tangle, even after being braided. But then, something shifted. The reflection smiled. Hermione froze. She hadn't smiled. The girl in the mirror tilted her head, lips parting just enough to whisper, "You're running out of time." Hermione stepped back, heart hammering. "Who are you?" The reflection didn't answer. Instead, it raised a finger to its lips in a slow, deliberate hush. Then it pointed, not at Hermione, but behind her, toward the door. "There's a key," it mouthed, hidden in the library's blind shelf, "but don't let him see you take it." "Him?" Hermione whispered, her voice trembling. "Tom." At the mention of his name, the reflection's expression darkened. Its eyes, her eyes, grew cold, hollow. It shook its head slowly, then pressed both hands flat against the glass, as if trying to push through. "You don't understand what he is," it said, voice now audible, thin and cracked like ice underfoot. "Not yet, but you will. And when you do, you must decide. Will you save him, or stop him?" "I'm not here to change history," Hermione said, gripping the edge of a nearby chair. "I just want to go home." The reflection laughed, a sound that echoed wrong in the room too, layered, too many voices tangled together. "Home? There is no home. Not for us. We're caught between seconds, between choices. You think this is the past. It's a wound, a scar the world made when time split. And he?" Her face twisted, a flicker of pain. "He's the one who opened it." Hermione's breath caught. "Tom did this." The reflection didn't answer. Instead, it turned slightly, gazing past her. And for a moment, Hermione felt the weight of another presence, cold, calculating, watching from the shadows beyond the door. "You're not alone," the reflection whispered urgently. "He's closer than you think." "I know," Hermione said. "I feel it." And then, without warning, the reflection reached out. Not a mimicry of her movement, but a real hand pressing against the glass from within. The surface rippled like water, and the hand nearly broke through, fingers stretching, pale and trembling. Hermione stumbled back. The mirror stilled. The reflection was gone. Only her own face remained, pale, shaken, eyes wide with a fear she couldn't name. She touched her cheek, half expecting it to be wet, but her skin was dry. A soft knock echoed at the door. She didn't turn. "Hermione?" came the voice. Smooth, measured, impossible to ignore. I heard voices. "Are you all right?" It was Tom, and he was standing just outside. The air in the abandoned Charms classroom tasted of dust and old parchment, thick with the silence of decades undisturbed. Moonlight, pale and fractured, spilled through the grimy arched window, slicing across the cracked marble floor like a blade. Hermione stood before the mirror, her breath shallow, her fingers trembling at her sides. It wasn't the same mirror she'd fallen through. This one stood taller, its frame heavier, carved with serpentine runes that pulsed faintly in the dark, like a slow, sleeping heartbeat. The glass didn't reflect her. Instead, it shimmered, liquid and deep, as though it held not images but memories. She'd spent 3 days mapping the mirrored Hogwarts, the library shelves reversed, the staircases moving in perfect symmetry, the portraits murmuring in hushed, disjointed echoes. The students wore the same uniforms, spoke the same spells, yet something lingered beneath the surface, a quiet wrongness in the way they moved, as if pulled by invisible strings. And then there was Tom Riddle, 17, prefect, future architect of unspeakable horrors. If here he smiled with a quiet elegance that made her pulse stutter. He'd found her in the restricted section 2 nights ago, calmly asking what she was searching for. She'd lied, of course, but he'd looked at her as if he already knew the truth. Now the mirror hummed. At first it was only a vibration beneath her palms when she touched the frame. Then came the voice, low, layered, neither male nor female, but ancient, like stone grinding against stone. Hermione Granger. She jerked back, heart-hammering. "Who's there?" "The glass remembers," it whispered. "It sees what was, what might be, what should have been." Her throat tightened. "You're sentient. I am the echo of choices," it said. "The weight of paths untaken. You are not meant to be here, yet you are necessary." She swallowed hard. "How do I get back?" The surface rippled, and for a moment she saw herself, older, weary, standing in a ruined hall, ash falling like snow. Then the image changed. Tom, standing over a body, his face blank, his wand smoking. She flinched. "You cannot return," the mirror murmured, "until you answer the question this world was built to ask." "What question?" "Can evil be unmade, or only understood?" Hermione pressed a hand to her forehead. "I don't understand." "You do," it said, softer now. "You see him. You listen. You do not flinch when he speaks of power, of purity, of order. You hear the logic, and worse, you hear the loneliness." She didn't deny it. Tom was brilliant. He quoted ancient texts, debated philosophy with a calm precision that bordered on hypnotic. He'd shown her hidden corridors, whispered secrets of the castle's foundation. He'd even once smiled when she corrected his interpretation of a rune. It was that smile that terrified her most. "Why show me this?" she asked. "Because he listens to you," the mirror said. "Not as a servant, not as a rival, as an equal, and that is dangerous." A cold breath brushed the back of her neck. "What do you want from me?" "Teach him mercy," it said, "before it's too late." She turned sharply. "He's already made his choice. In my world, he word, in your world, he was never seen." The mirror interrupted, never challenged by someone who could meet his mind and still offer kindness. Here, the balance trembles. He does not yet wear the mask fully. There is a crack, and in that crack, light. Hermione stared into the glass. This time, she saw Tom as a boy, sitting alone in the common room, tracing the edge of a photograph. 2 children, one with dark curls, the other with wide, trusting eyes. She didn't recognize them. But the ache in his expression, it was real. "You're asking me to change him," she whispered. "No," the mirror said. "I am asking you to see him. Before the darkness swallows what little remains." The runes along the frame flared once, then dimmed. The voice faded, leaving only silence and the weight of a single impossible task. And for the first time, Hermione wondered if saving herself meant saving him too. Rain tapped against the high-arched windows of the abandoned Charms classroom, each drop a muffled echo in the silence that had stretched between them for nearly 10 minutes. Hermione stood by the sill, her fingers tracing the cold edge of the mirror shard she'd smuggled from the ruined West Tower. It shimmered faintly, its surface like oil over water, showing not her reflection, but a flicker of a courtyard she didn't recognize. Students in outdated robes, a banner bearing a crest she'd never seen. "You still believe in absolutes," Tom said at last, his voice quiet, almost amused. He hadn't moved from the desk where he sat, one leg crossed over the other, a book open but unread in his lap. Good, evil, right, wrong. As if morality were a spell with a fixed incantation. Hermione turned. "Isn't it? Intent matters. Consequences matter. You can't just reshape people's wills and call it enlightenment." He smiled then, slow and knowing. "And yet, you do. Every time you argue, persuade, charm someone into seeing your way, you just lack the honesty to admit the coercion." "That's not the same," she snapped. "I don't erase their minds. I don't twist their fears." "No," he said, rising. You offer logic, reason, the unbearable weight of should. That's subtler, perhaps, but still a chain. She met his gaze, the candlelight catching the gray in his eyes, storm-colored, calculating. What about pity? She asked suddenly. He stilled. Pity? Yes, you dismiss it as weakness. But it's the root of compassion, of mercy. Mercy is a luxury. The strong afford the weak to ease their conscience, he said. But there was a hesitation in his voice, a fraction of doubt. Or it's what makes strength bearable, she countered. Imagine a world where no one ever hesitated to punish, where every slight was answered with force. Would that world last? It would be efficient, he said. But he didn't sound convinced. She stepped closer. You know it wouldn't. It would collapse into chaos. Or worse, obedience without loyalty, respect without love, a cage of order. He looked away toward the mirror. Love, he murmured. Another illusion, a chemical rush, a survival mechanism. Is that all it is to you? She asked softly. Even after your mother loved you enough to die bringing you into this world. His head snapped toward her. You don't speak of her. I'm sorry, she said, but held her ground. But she chose you, over death. Over oblivion. That's not biology. That's not instinct. That's something else. For the first time, Tom looked uncertain. His hand twitched at his side as if reaching for his wand, then stopped. She was weak, he said, the words brittle. Sentimental, and she died for it. And yet here you are, Hermione said. Alive, because of her sentiment. Silence. Outside the rain thickened, drumming harder against the glass. The mirror flickered again, and in its depths, for a moment they both saw it. A young boy, maybe 6, standing alone in a dimly lit room, clutching a stuffed owl to his chest. His eyes were wide, afraid, familiar. Tom turned away sharply. You were never taught how to be loved, Hermione said, her voice gentle now. But that doesn't mean you can't understand it. He laughed, low and bitter. You think compassion is a lesson? Something to be learned like transfiguration? I think it's a choice, she said, every day. To listen, to spare, to forgive. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. He stared at her, the mask slipping just enough to reveal something raw beneath. The boy in the mirror, maybe, buried under years of calculation and control. And if I don't want to choose it, he asked. Then you're not as brilliant as you think, she said. Because the hardest magic isn't in domination. It's in restraint. In understanding someone else's pain and choosing not to use it against them. Tom didn't answer. But when he finally looked at the mirror again, he didn't turn away from the image of the child. And for the first time, his reflection, his real one, in the glass, looked uncertain. Not dangerous, not cold. Just human. The air in the corridor tasted of damp stone and something older, dry earth, perhaps, with a ghost of extinguished torches. Hermione followed Tom, each step echoing too loudly in the silence that pressed against her ears like cotton. He moved with a predator's grace, his black robes whispering against the floor, one pale hand trailing along the wall, as if reading Braille in the cracks. The torches they passed flared to life at his approach, their flames unnaturally blue, casting long, trembling shadows that seemed to retreat from him. This way, he said, voice low, almost intimate. Few have stood where we're going, fewer still have left. Hermione tightened her grip on her wand, though she didn't draw it. Not yet. She had learned quickly that defiance here was currency, and Tom Riddle hoarded power like a dragon with gold. But she also knew that in this world, the rules were not her own. The castle didn't obey logic. It listened to him. They reached a dead end, a smooth stretch of wall carved with serpentine patterns that shifted when she blinked. Tom placed his palm flat against the stone. Veritas occulta, he murmured. The wall split open with a groan, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling into darkness. Cold air rose from below, carrying the scent of salt and something metallic. Blood, maybe, or rusted iron. You're certain about this? Hermione asked, her breath fogging in the chill. He turned to her, eyes glinting like polished onyx. You came here seeking answers. This is where they live, buried, forgotten, but not gone. She stepped forward. The stones beneath her feet were uneven, worn down by centuries of unseen footsteps. The descent felt endless, the walls closing in. the blue flames now lining the steps like watching eyes. The deeper they went, the heavier the silence became, not empty, but full. Full of whispers that weren't quite there, of thoughts that weren't hers. At the bottom, a vast chamber unfolded before them. It was not the chamber of secrets she remembered. This was older, wilder. The ceiling arched high above, embedded with what looked like fossilized bones, massive, rib-like curves of stone arching, like the spine of some ancient leviathan. Columns of black marble, carved with runes she didn't recognize, pulsed faintly, as if breathing. In the center of the room stood a pool of still, obsidian water, its surface so smooth it reflected nothing. "This is not on any map," she whispered. "No," Tom agreed, stepping beside her. "It was buried when the school was built. The founders walled it off. They feared what it showed." "What is it?" "A mirror, but not of glass, of memory, of truth." He gestured to the pool. "It doesn't show your face, it shows your lie." Hermione frowned. "That makes no sense." "It does if you understand that every person carries a falsehood they tell themselves, a belief that holds them together. This chamber strips it away." She looked at him then, really looked. "And what does it show you?" Tom's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes, something almost human. "You'll see." He stepped forward and knelt by a pool. With a slender finger he touched the surface. The water rippled, once, twice, and then the image formed. Not Tom. Not as he was. A boy, small and shivering, in a threadbare coat, standing alone on a rainy platform. An orphanage badge pinned to his chest. Behind him, the train pulled away, steam swallowing the tracks. His face was blank, empty, but his hands, clenched into fists, trembled. Hermione's breath caught. "That's not your lie," she said softly. "That's your truth." Tom withdrew his hand. The image vanished. "Isn't it the same thing? To believe you were never wanted, and to pretend you don't care. That's the lie I live." Silence fell again, heavier now. Then gently he turned to her. "Now you." Hermione hesitated. But she stepped forward. She knelt. She touched the water. The surface darkened, then shifted. She saw herself, not in the library, not in battle, but in a quiet room, sunlight streaming through a window. A boy with messy hair and green eyes sat beside her, laughing at something she'd said. Ron leaned against the wall, grinning. They were young, carefree, happy, and she was turning away, walking toward the door, toward a life that wasn't this. The lie, the chamber whispered without sound, isn't that you're not enough. It's that you believe you don't belong. Hermione pulled her hand back as if burned. Tom watched her, his voice softer now. "You see, even the brightest minds are fools to themselves." She didn't answer. She couldn't. The chamber held its breath, and somewhere, deep in the stone, something ancient stirred. Dust hung thick in the air, swirling in the slanted beams of afternoon light that seeped through the cracked stained glass of the abandoned observatory. Hermione's breath came in shallow puffs, each one stirring the ancient particles that had lain undisturbed for decades, centuries perhaps. Her fingers trembled as she brushed away grime from the stone pedestal at the roof's center. Beneath, etched into the dark basalt, was a pattern that sent a jolt through her chest. Spiraling runes interwoven with glyphs that pulsed faintly beneath her fingertips, humming like a heartbeat buried in stone. This is impossible," she whispered. Tom Riddle stood behind her, his presence a quiet storm. He hadn't spoken since they'd pried open the hidden panel beneath the collapsed staircase. Now he stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking against the cracked flagstones. His dark eyes scanned the inscription, sharp and unblinking. "These are not Latin," he murmured. "Not any language I've studied. And yet, I know them." Hermione turned sharply. "You know them?" He didn't answer at once. Instead, he reached into his coat and withdrew a small journal. Black leather, edges worn with use. He flipped it open to a page filled with his precise handwriting. There, drawn in ink, were the same spirals, the same angular glyphs. Hermione's breath caught. "Where did you get these?" she asked, voice tight. "I didn't," he said. "They came to me, in dreams, for months. I thought they were fragments, hallucinations perhaps, or the whispers of some forgotten magic. But they felt true, like remembering something I'd never learned. She stepped closer, comparing the runes on the pedestal to those in his book. Identical. Not just similar. Identical. The same sequence, the same subtle imperfections in the curves, the same marks she'd carved into her own time-turner before the experiment failed. "This is the formula," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The one I used. The one that brought me here." Tom's gaze snapped to hers. "You mean to say—" "I mean to say this relic predates me by decades, by centuries, if Hogwarts was even built by then. And yet it contains a spell I invented in the year 1998? Silence settled between them, thick and charged. Outside, a distant bell tolled, muffled, distorted, as though heard through water. The mirror Hogwarts never kept proper time. Tom traced one rune with the tip of his finger. "So the magic doesn't originate with you." "No," she said slowly. "It's older. But that's not what frightens me. What frightens me is that it's recursive. The spell that brought me here is inscribed here, because I used it. But I only knew it because I saw it here. It's a loop, a paradox made solid." Tom's lips curved, not quite a smile. "Then we are caught in a circle with no beginning. Or perhaps every point is the beginning." Hermione shook her head. "Magic can't sustain paradoxes. Not for long. The universe corrects itself, usually by erasing the anomaly. And which of us," he asked, voice low, "is the anomaly?" She looked at him, really looked. The boy who would become Voldemort. The boy who had already killed, she knew, though he wore innocence like a well-tailored coat. And yet, in this place, in this fractured time, he had helped her, studied with her, listened to her. The warmth in his eyes when she explained arithmancy, the way his hand had lingered on hers when they climbed the broken stairs, were those real, or merely reflections of what she wished could be? "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe both of us." The relic pulsed again, brighter this time. The runes glowed a deep amber, then shifted, rearranging themselves before their eyes. The symbols twisted, forming new equations, new pathways. Hermione gasped. "It's changing," she said. "It's responding to us." "To us," Tom echoed. "Not just the magic, us being here, together." The air thickened. A low hum filled the chamber, rising in pitch. Cracks spread across the pedestal, thin as spider silk, glowing from within. "It's unstable," Hermione said. "If the paradox collapses, we could be unmade," Tom finished. "Or worse, trapped between moments. Forever." She looked at the shifting runes, at the boy beside her, who was both monster and mind, savior and shadow. And she realized with a quiet dread that the relic wasn't just a key to returning home. It was a choice. One path led back to her time, to Harry, to Ron, to the war she knew. The other, still forming, still unwritten, led into the unknown. And Tom Riddle was watching her, waiting, not with demand, not with threat, but with hope. The mirror didn't crack, it breathed. A slow, shuddering inhale of moonlight and silence, as if the glass were a living throat. Hermione stood before it, bare feet numb against the cold flagstone, her fingers trembling at her sides. She had come seeking answers, but the mirror gave her nightmares instead. A ripple passed through the silvered surface, distorting her reflection, not her, but someone else. A woman in tattered robes, screaming soundlessly as flames curled around her ankles. Then a battlefield, bodies sprawled across a courtyard she knew. Hogwarts, but broken, its towers collapsed like shattered teeth. The sky bled crimson, choked with ash, and the flapping shadows of creatures with too many eyes. She stepped back, her breath catching. No, this isn't real. It can't be. But the images came faster now, a relentless tide. A boy with a lightning scar, face pressed to the dirt, wand snapped in two. The giant serpent coiling around the statue of Rowena Ravenclaw, its maw-dripping venom. And then, him, Tom Riddle, but not the boy she'd come to know in this warped 1940s, polished and precise in his prefect badge and soft-spoken charm. This was a monster carved from shadow and fire, bald, serpentine, eyes like pits of molten red. He stood atop the ruins of the great hall, robes black as a starless night, one skeletal hand raised as wizards and witches knelt, or burned. Hermione pressed a hand to the glass as if she could stop it. This is him? This is what he becomes. The vision shifted again. A small child, trembling in a cupboard beneath the stairs. The label on his shirt, Dudley. A woman with bright red hair, arms outstretched, mouth open in a final cry. Not Harry, please. I'll do anything, before a flash of green light swallowed her whole. Hermione staggered back, her chest tight. She had read the histories, pieced together the fragments from Dumbledore's memories, from the whispers of survivors. But seeing it, feeling it, the weight of those lives extinguished, the terror in that child's eyes, it was different. It was real. A floorboard creaked behind her. You see it too, Tom said, voice low, almost gentle. She turned. He stood in the doorway, pale in the dim light, his dark eyes fixed on the mirror. Not startled, not horrified, fascinated. How long have you been watching? She whispered. Long enough. He stepped forward, his polished shoes silent on the stone. It shows you the future, doesn't it? Or a future? It shows you, she said, voice breaking. It shows what you become. He didn't flinch. Instead, he tilted his head, studying the glass as if it held a riddle. And what am I in this future? A tyrant, a killer, Voldemort. The name hung between them, sharp as a blade. He didn't react, no anger, no denial. Just a slow blink, as if cataloging the word, testing its weight. Voldemort, he repeated, almost amused. An anagram. I am Lord Voldemort. How poetic. This isn't a game, she snapped. You destroy everything. You murder children. You tear apart families. You turn love into fear, magic into a weapon of terror. He turned to her then, his gaze piercing. And who taught me to fear, Hermione? Who taught me that power is the only language the world respects? She opened her mouth, but no words came, because she knew, orphaned, unloved, raised in a place that saw him as a freak. He hadn't been born a monster. He had been made. The mirror flickered again, this time a younger Tom. This Tom standing alone in the forest, holding a wand he hadn't earned, whispering spells in a language no child should know. His face was cold, empty, but in the corner of his eye, a single tear. Hermione reached out, not toward the glass, but toward him. You don't have to become that. He looked at her hand, then up at her face, for a heartbeat, just one. Something fragile flickered in his eyes, something almost human. Then it was gone. The mirror shows possibilities, he said softly, not destiny. And if the future can be seen, perhaps it can be changed. But at what cost? She asked. You think power will heal you? It won't. It only hollows you out. You smiled, then, sad and knowing. Maybe I'm already hollow. The mirror dimmed, the visions fading like smoke, but the silence that followed was heavier than any scream. The air in the abandoned astronomy tower was thick with the scent of old parchment and damp stone, laced with something sharper, ozone, like the moment before a storm breaks. Moonlight bled through the cracked dome above, casting fractured silver across the floor, illuminating the jagged edges of the mirror that stood propped against the wall. It was no longer whole. Shards of enchanted glass hovered in mid-air, suspended by a spell. Hermione could feel humming against her skin, like a pulse beneath ice. She had tried for 3 nights to mend it with her own magic, whispering incantations from forgotten tomes, tracing runes in the dust. Nothing held. The mirror rejected her, as if it recognized her as an intruder in this warped reflection of time. And then he appeared. Tom Riddle stepped from the shadows as though he had always been there, his presence quiet but absolute. He wore his prefect's badge, polished to a shine, and his black robes fell perfectly straight, untouched by dust or time. His dark eyes flicked to the broken mirror, then to her, and something unreadable passed behind them. Curiosity, calculation, maybe even hunger. You've been reckless, he said, voice low and smooth, like velvet over steel. Breaking a mirror between worlds is no small thing, Granger. It's not even meant to be found. She turned to face him, spine straight, refusing to let her fear show. I didn't break it. It shattered when I came through. I don't even know how it works. Yet you've been trying to fix it. He took a step closer, and the air grew colder. For 3 nights. I've watched you. You're clever, but you're guessing. And guessing with magic like this, it's suicide. She swallowed. She hadn't known he'd been watching. Of course he had. Nothing happened in this version of Hogwarts without his knowledge. If you know so much, she said, then tell me how to repair it. He smiled, just slightly, the corner of his mouth lifting in a way that sent a shiver down her spine. I might, but knowledge has a price. Of course it does. You teach me. He stepped around the floating shards, his fingers brushing the edge of one without flinching. How the mirror works. How you came through. What lies beyond it. Your time. Your world. And in return, I hope you mend it. Not out of kindness. Out of interest. Hermione stared at him. This was dangerous. She knew it in her bones. Tom Riddle, even young and unbroken, was a coiled serpent beneath a mask of perfection. To give him knowledge of the future, of Horcruxes, of his own downfall, was to risk everything. But she was trapped. The library here held no answers. The professors were ghosts of their former selves, teaching watered-down magic under Riddle's quiet influence. And every day she stayed, the mirror decayed further, its magic fraying like old thread. And if I refuse, she asked, then you stay. His gaze didn't waver. Forever. Or until you go mad trying to fix what you don't understand. She exhaled sharply. You think I trust you? I think you don't have a choice. He tilted his head, studying her. You're not like them. You see through the illusion of this place. You know it's wrong. That's why you want to leave. But you're also intrigued. I can see it. She didn't deny it. Because he was right. What do you want with the mirror? She asked. He turned fully to her, the moonlight catching the sharp angles of his face. To understand power, not just to wield it, but to reshape reality. If a mirror can pull someone from another time, what else could it do? Could it show what should have been? What might be? His voice dropped, almost reverent. Could it show me a world where I was never born in a Muggle orphanage? Where I was never diminished? For a heartbeat she saw it. The boy beneath the monster. The loneliness, the rage, the hunger to be more than what fate had given him. And that terrified her most of all. Teach me, he said again. Softer now. And I will help you go home. She looked at the shattered glass, at the fragments of her own reflection scattered across the stone. All right, she whispered. But if you try to use this against me, I won't, he said. Not yet. And in that moment, the bargain was made. Not with a handshake, not with magic, but with silence, and the unspoken understanding that neither of them truly believed the other. Rain tapped against the leaded glass of the library's west window, a soft, insistent rhythm that seemed to echo the quiet pulse of the castle. The air smelled of old parchment, ink, and something faintly metallic, like the edge of a storm caught between moments. Hermione stood in the shadows between 2 towering shelves, fingers brushing the spine of a forgotten text on temporal inversion. Her breath came slow, measured. She had been here for hours, pretending to research, waiting. And then he arrived. Tom Riddle moved like smoke, graceful, silent, inevitable. His footsteps made no sound on the worn stone, but she felt his presence before she saw him. A shift in the air. A weight settling in her chest. He rounded the shelf, his dark eyes already fixed on her. You've been avoiding the restricted section, he said, voice low and smooth. Curious, given your reputation. She turned to face him, careful not to let her expression betray anything. And what reputation is that? The kind that seeks answers others are too afraid to name. He tilted his head slightly, studying her. You're not like the others. You don't flinch when I speak. You don't pretend not to notice the way the candles dim when I pass. Hermione met his gaze, steady. I notice everything. A faint smile touched his lips, something cold, but not unkind. Yes, that's what I thought. Silence stretched between them, thin as spider silk. She could hear the faint rustle of his robes as he stepped closer, the quiet inhale of breath through his nose. He reached past her, plucked a book from the shelf, on the nature of reflections and the selves they hold. Her fingers tightened imperceptibly. I've read that, she said. Then you know it's incomplete. It speaks of mirrors as traps, as prisons. But what if they're doors? What if they're both? His eyes flickered just once, with something like approval. You're beginning to understand. She exhaled slowly. I don't understand anything. Not truly. But I know this world isn't right. Hogwarts is the same, but tilted. Like a painting hung just off-center. It's not a mirror of what was, Tom said, turning the book in his hands. It's a mirror of what could be. A possibility given form. And you don't belong here. No, she admitted. I don't. Then why are you here? She hesitated. The truth was too dangerous, but so was lying. I was trying to return something. A mistake, and I ended up here, trapped. Tom closed the book with a soft snap. Mistakes are rarely accidents. More often they're choices we refuse to name. She looked at him then, not just at the polished prefect, the golden boy of Slytherin, but at the boy beneath, the one who studied spells not for power, but for understanding, the one who read philosophy in the dead of night and wrote poetry in margins no one ever saw. You've been watching me, she said. I watch everyone, he replied. But you're different. You speak like someone from another time. You know things you shouldn't. And you look at me, he paused, as if weighing the words, as if you've already seen what I've become. Her breath caught. He stepped closer. Tell me, Hermione, do I fall? The question hung in the air, heavier than any curse. She swallowed. I can't answer that. Because you don't know, or because you won't. Because knowing might change it. And that would be a bad thing? I don't know, she whispered. Maybe not. But time isn't a river. It's a web. Pull one thread, and the whole thing trembles. He studied her long and hard. Then slowly, he extended the book toward her. Then let's find the pattern together. She stared at it. A truce. An invitation. A trap. Her fingers brushed his as she took it. Warm. Real. And for the first time she wondered if saving herself meant saving him too. The candlelight flickered across the pages of the ancient grimoire, its shadows dancing like restless spirits along the stone walls of the abandoned classroom. Outside, the mirrored Hogwarts slept beneath a sky, thick with stars, its towers elongated and slightly warped, as though viewed through running water. Hermione traced a finger beneath a passage on temporal refraction, her breath shallow. The words were familiar, yet inverted, Latin with a twist, syntax rearranged as if spoken by someone who knew the rules, but chose to bend them. You're frowning again, came a voice, low and measured from across the table. Tom Riddle didn't look up from his own book, a volume bound in what might have been human skin. It's unbecoming, unthinking, she replied, not bothering to mask the irritation. Something you'd do well to try. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I'm thinking that you still don't believe me when I say the mirror isn't a window into the past. It's a possibility. A single breath held between two choices. She exhaled slowly. And you expect me to believe that you, Tom Riddle, exist in some alternate future where you chose mercy over power. He finally looked up. His eyes were dark, but not unkind. Not yet. I expect you to consider that even the most wicked men were once boys who read poetry and wondered if stars were holes in the sky. Hermione blinked. She hadn't expected that. You read poetry? In translation, he said, closing his book with a soft thud. Catullus, not because I liked it, because I wanted to know what made men weep over words. Silence settled between them, thick but not uncomfortable. The air smelled of dust, old parchment, and the faint metallic tang of the mirror that stood in the corner, its surface still and dark, like frozen mercury. You still haven't told me why you're helping me, she said. I haven't decided, he answered. Curiosity, boredom, or perhaps I simply enjoy watching you fail. She rolled her eyes. Charming. You mistake charm for truth, he said, but you're learning. She leaned back, rubbing her temples. Every spell I try to reverse the mirror's pull just strengthens it. It's as if the more I fight, the more it wants me here. Maybe it doesn't want you, Tom said quietly. Maybe it wants us. She turned to him, frowning. What are you talking about? He stood, moving to the mirror. His reflection didn't follow. Instead, the surface shimmered, showing not his face, but a corridor. Familiar, yet wrong. The walls pulsed faintly, breathing like a living thing. This place isn't bound by time as you know it. It remembers every choice never made, every path untaken. And it knows when two minds, two wills, align too closely. That's impossible, she whispered. Is it? He turned to face her. You challenge me. Not with spells, not with force, but with ideas. No one's done that before. Not truly. She stood, crossing the room until she stood beside him. The mirror showed another image now, herself standing alone in the great hall. Older, her robes tattered, eyes hollow. Then it shifted. Tom, not as the Dark Lord she knew, but as a man in a tailored suit, standing before a council of wizards, speaking with calm authority. "What is this?" she breathed. "Echoes," he said. "Possibilities. The mirror shows us not what was, but what might still be if we choose differently." She looked at him, really looked. Not at the monster history would name, but at the boy who read Catullus in the dark, the boy who still believed he could outthink fate. "And if we don't choose," she asked, "then the mirror keeps us," he said. "Not as prisoners, as reflections, forever asking the questions we were too afraid to answer." Outside, the first pale light of dawn began to seep through the high windows. But in this room, time held its breath. And for the first time, Hermione wasn't sure she wanted to go home. The air in the head boy's study was thick with the scent of old parchment and beeswax, the kind of stillness that settled only when the castle exhaled after curfew. Moonlight bled through the lidded windows, casting silver runnels across the floor, illuminating dust motes that swam like tiny stars in the dark. Hermione sat across from Tom Riddle, her spine straight, fingers curled around a cup of tea she hadn't touched. He had offered it with a smile, polite, practiced, perfect, and she had accepted, not because she wanted it, but because refusing would have been a challenge. And tonight, she wasn't here to challenge. Not yet. They had been debating magical theory for nearly an hour. Transfiguration's limits, the ethics of soul manipulation, the possibility of reversing time. Tom spoke with the precision of a scalpel, every word placed with intent, every gesture measured. He was magnificent in his control, a portrait of composure, painted in shadow and candlelight. But Hermione had been watching. Not his words, not his logic. Those were distractions. She watched the way his thumb tapped once, twice, against the stem of his teacup when she mentioned the veil. The slight tightening at the corner of his eyes when she questioned whether true immortality was worth the cost. And then, quietly, almost carelessly, she said, "You're afraid of it, aren't you, Tom?" The room didn't change. The fire still crackled low in the grate. The clock on the mantel ticked forward, steady as a heartbeat, but something in the air shifted, like the hush before thunder. She hadn't meant to say his name, not like that, not with that softness, not with the familiarity that slipped through before she could catch it. But it was out now, hanging between them, warm and dangerous. Tom went very still, his fingers stilled on the cup, his breath, barely audible, caught, just for a fraction, and then released too slowly. For the first time since she'd known him, his mask cracked. Not shattered, not yet, but it cracked. His eyes, dark, fathomless, flickered, not with anger, not with outrage, but with something worse, recognition, as if she had reached past the layers of charm and intellect, past the polished veneer of the golden boy, and touched something raw and buried. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, voice low, smooth, but strained at the edges. "I think I do," she said, leaning forward slightly. "You spend so much time building walls, around your magic, around your mind, around your name. But you can't wall off time, can you? No matter how clever you are, it still moves, it still takes." His jaw tightened. A muscle jumped along the line of his cheek. "You don't understand the stakes," he whispered. "No," she admitted. "But I understand fear, and I see it in you. Not of death, of being forgotten. Of mattering so much that the world bends to your will, and then one day no one remembers why." His hand moved, fast, sharp, and the teacup shattered on the floor, porcelain skittering like bones across the stone. Tea bloomed dark against the rug. But he didn't look at it. He stared at her, chest rising, falling, his breath no longer steady. "You think you know me," he said, voice trembling, not with rage, but with something quieter, something brittle. "You think because you say my name like you've earned the right, you see inside me." "I say your name," she said, voice soft but unyielding, "because it's yours. Not the title you wear, not the power you hoard. You, Tom." He flinched, not visibly. not enough for anyone else to notice. But she saw it, the minute recoil, the way his lashes dipped, the sudden vulnerability in the set of his shoulders. And in that moment, she didn't see the Dark Lord. She saw a boy who had learned too early that love was conditional, that trust was a liability, that the only way to survive was to become untouchable. The silence stretched, aching. Then quietly he said, "No one calls me that anymore," and the sadness in his voice broke something in her chest. The quill scratched against parchment in the quiet of the abandoned prefect's bathroom, steam curling from the cracked marble sinks like ghostly fingers. Moonlight filtered through the high, warped glass, fractured by age and grime, casting silver bars across the stone floor. Hermione's breath fogged in the chill air, her fingers numb despite the warmth of the bathwater slowly cooling behind her. She dipped the quill again, the ink pooling thick and black in the well. "Dear Harry," she wrote, then paused. The name felt like a spell that might unravel her. How many times had she begun this? A dozen? 20? Each letter folded and hidden beneath a loose flagstone near Moaning Myrtle's favorite stall. Letters never sent. Words spoken into the void. "I don't know if you can hear me. I don't even know if you remember me." The ink bled slightly on the R in remember, as though the word itself were dissolving. She exhaled, long and slow. "It's been 8 months here. 8 months of walking these halls that are familiar and utterly alien. The staircases shift too quickly. The paintings whisper in languages I don't understand. And the sky is always the color of tarnished copper, even at noon." She glanced at the mirror above the sink. Her reflection looked back. Darker circles under the eyes, hair wilder, a new scar along her jawline from a run-in with a rogue suit of armor. But her eyes, they still held something. Not hope, not exactly, but resolve. She hoped. Ron would laugh at how I've started talking to myself. Or maybe he'd just hand me a chocolate frog and tell me to stop overthinking. She smiled faintly, the expression brittle. I miss that. I miss the way he'd eat with his mouth open. How you'd roll your eyes, Harry. I miss Ginny's laugh. I miss the burrow, the smell of burnt toast and lavender. I even miss Fred and George's pranks, though I'd never admit that aloud. A drop of ink fell, blooming like a bruise on the parchment. She didn't blot it. Sometimes I wonder if I'm still real. If I've become a ghost in this place, haunting a past that never was, or a future that should never be. Tom says time isn't a line but a river with eddies and whirlpools. He says I'm caught in one. I don't trust him. Not fully. But when he speaks, there's a clarity in his voice, a precision, like every word has been weighed and measured. It frightens me, and worse, it intrigues me. She paused, listening. Somewhere in the castle a door creaked. Footsteps, light, deliberate. She didn't need to look to know who it was. He walks these halls like he owns them, which, in this world, he might. He's not what I expected. Not yet. There's no mark on his arm, no red eyes, just a boy with too much intelligence and too little mercy. And yet, once I saw him stop to help a first-year pickup, spilled books. He didn't sneer, didn't mock. Just knelt, gathered them, and said, "Be more careful." His voice was almost kind. But then he looked up, and his eyes, dark, fathomless, held something else. Something patient, calculating. Do you think he knows what he'll become? Or is he already becoming it? One small choice at a time. She folded the letter carefully, sealed it with a scrap of wax stolen from the headmaster's office. Dippet, not Dumbledore, and tucked it into the crack beneath the stone. Another ghost added to the pile. I don't know if I'll ever get back. I don't know if I want to. Not if it means leaving this world untouched. Because if Tom Riddle was always meant to rise, then perhaps he was always meant to fall. And maybe, just maybe, I'm here to help him see the cost before it's too late. Outside, the wind howled through the towers. Somewhere, a clock struck 2. And in the silence that followed, Hermione whispered the names of her friends, as if saying them aloud could stitch the fraying threads of memory back together. Harry, Ron, Ginny, I'm still here. The air in the catacombs tasted of damp stone and old magic, thick enough to coat the tongue. Hermione's breath curled in faint wisps before her, the lantern's glow barely pushing back the shadows that clung to the arched ceiling like mold. Her boots echoed too loudly in the silence, each step a defiance against the stillness that had settled here for decades. Tom walked ahead, his silhouette sharp and controlled, one hand trailing along the cold wall as if drawing strength from the darkness itself. He didn't speak, he hadn't since they'd descended, and the quiet between them was no longer comfortable. It was charged, like the moment before lightning splits the sky. "This is where you found it?" Hermione asked, her voice softer than she intended, as though the walls might resent being disturbed. Tom stopped. He turned slowly, his eyes catching the lantern light in a way that made them seem to gleam, almost serpentine. "Here," he said, and pressed his palm flat against a section of the wall. With a soft grating noise, a slab of stone slid inward, revealing a hollow space no larger than a coffin. Inside, etched into the back wall, was a sigil. Hermione stepped forward, her pulse quickening. It was carved deep, precise, the lines unbroken despite the years. A spiral at the center, coiled like a sleeping serpent, ringed by angular rooms that spiraled outward in perfect symmetry. And there, between the outermost rings, a symbol she knew, not from books, not from any archive. From her own skin, from the scar that still tingled beneath her sleeve, the mark the time rune had left when it burned its way into her arm during the experiment. "That's impossible," she whispered. Tom watched her, unblinking. "You recognize it." She couldn't look away from the symbol. "It's part of a sequence, a temporal ward. But this isn't just similar. It's identical. That spiral, the alignment of the outer marks, it's the same magic. But it shouldn't exist here. Not in this time, not in any recorded history. Yet here it is," Tom said, voice low, almost reverent. "And here you are." She turned to him, sudden suspicion flaring. "How long have you known about this?" 6 months, he admitted. "I felt the pull during a ritual beneath the chamber. The earth shifted when I spoke the old words, the ones they say Salazar whispered before he vanished. This chamber opened. I've studied it ever since. Tried to activate it. Failed." He paused. "Until you arrived." Hermione's throat tightened. "You think I'm part of this?" "I think," he said, stepping closer, "that the mirror didn't bring you here by accident. That scar on your arm, it glows when you're near ancient magic, doesn't it? I've seen it. Faint, but there, like it remembers something." She pulled her sleeve down instinctively, as if he could peel back the fabric with his gaze alone. "Even if there's a connection, it doesn't mean I'm meant to be here. Time isn't linear, Tom. It folds, breaks. Sometimes things echo before they happen." He smiled then, not unkindly. "Or after." A cold draft slithered through the chamber, and the lantern flickered. Shadows danced across the sigil, making the serpent appear to shift, to breathe. Hermione reached out, not touching, just hovering her fingers above the carving. A hum vibrated through the stone, up her bones into her teeth. The scar on her arm burned, not painfully, but insistently, like a compass needle finding north. "It's responding to you," Tom murmured. "I think, it's not just a ward," she said slowly. "It's a key, or a lock. Maybe both. This isn't just about time. It's about balance. Reflection." She looked at him then, truly looked. His face was composed, but his eyes, dark, endless, held something raw. Not hunger, not ambition, not in that moment, something closer to fear. "What if we're not the first ones to stand here?" she asked. Tom exhaled, slow and measured. "Then history has been lying to us, or we've been lying to ourselves." Outside, far above, a bell tolled, dull, distant, like a memory echoing through water, and deep below, the serpent in the stone watched them both. The air in the library's restricted section was thick with dust and the faint, metallic tang of old magic. Moonlight bled through the high-arched windows, casting long, skeletal shadows across the spines of forgotten tomes. Hermione moved like a ghost between the shelves, her fingers trailing over cracked leather and brittle parchment. She had found the hidden compartment behind Magic's Mosté veil by accident. Her elbow had brushed the shelf, a soft click, and the wall had sighed open like a held breath released. Inside, the space was no larger than a brood closet, but every inch pulsed with restrained power. Tom Riddle's handwriting covered the walls, scrawled in ink, burnt into the stone with something darker. Diagrams spiraled outward, chains of souls, spectral threads, the anatomy of a fractured spirit. At the center, A single sentence stood out in jagged script. The self is not one. It can be divided. It can be preserved. Hermione's breath caught. She had known, of course, what Tom Riddle would become. She had read the accounts, studied the history, buried herself in the horror of his soul splitting his horcruxes. But this was not the act of a madman. This was the work of a mind holding a theory, peeling back the layers of existence like a scholar dissecting a cadaver. Calculated, precise, terrifying. A journal lay open on the small stone pedestal. She didn't need to touch it to know it was his. The same elegant slanting hand filled the pages with observations, incantations, and, most chilling, personal reflections. October 12th. The theory holds. The soul recoils at division, but it does not shatter. Not entirely. Pain is inevitable. A scream I have buried beneath silence. I felt myself tear just once, like a thread pulled too fast from fabric. The piece I severed still hums in the ring. I can feel it waiting, not dead, not alive, just separate. Hermione stepped back, her heart hammering against her ribs. He had started so young, before the diary, before the gaunt ring, before any of it. This wasn't born of desperation or fear of death. It had been curiosity first, a question posed in the quiet of his mind. What if I could live forever? And then, like all things with Tom, it had become obsession. A floorboard creaked behind her. She turned slowly. Tom Riddle stood in the archway, his silhouette sharp against the dim light of the library. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, dark, fathomless, flicked to the open journal, then back to her. "You weren't meant to find this," he said, voice low, almost gentle. "I wasn't meant to find any of this," she whispered. "But here I am." He stepped inside, the door sealing shut behind him with a soft thud. "Most people fear death because it is unknown," he said, moving past her to study his own notes, as if seeing them anew. "I fear it because I understand it. Death is an ending. A full stop. I refuse to be a sentence that ends." "That's not life," she said. "What you're doing, it's not living. It's preservation, like a specimen in a jar." He turned to her then, a faint smile playing at his lips. "And what is memory, if not a preserved moment? What is love, if not the echo of feeling long past? You cling to the past as much as I do, Hermione. Your books, your rules, your desperate need to fix what's broken. Isn't that a kind of immortality too?" She flinched. He had no right to say her name like that, like he knew her. "It's not the same," she said. "You're tearing yourself apart." "I'm evolving," he corrected. "The soul was never meant to be shackled to a single life, a single body. Imagine, what if we could shed mortality like a coat? What if we could become more than human?" "You're already more than human," she said softly. "That's what frightens me." He went very still. For the first time, something flickered in his eyes, something raw, almost vulnerable. Not regret, not quite, but recognition, as if she had seen a crack in the mask and hadn't recoiled. "You think I don't know what I'm becoming?" he asked, quieter now. "I see it in the mirror, the hollows beneath my eyes, the way the light doesn't catch me the same way. But I made my choice, long ago." "And if you could unmake it?" she asked. "If there were another way?" He studied her, the silence stretching like a taut wire between them. "There is no other way," he said. "But I wonder, if someone like you had been here sooner, perhaps I would have looked for one." The surface of the mirror shimmered like oil on water, cold and depthless, reflecting nothing of the ruined astronomy tower behind her, only a void that pulsed with something older than memory. Hermione stood barefoot on the cracked stone, her breath shallow, the weight of the past few days pressing down like a physical thing. She had tried every incantation, every counter-charm, even wandless magic, drawn from desperation. Nothing worked. The mirror did not obey. It watched, and then, without warning, it showed her, herself, older, weary, her hair longer, streaked with silver at the temples. But it was her eyes that stopped Hermione's breath. Once bright with curiosity, now they were dart, knowing wimmed with shadows that spoke of sleepless nights, and choices too heavy to name. The woman in the glass wore black robes cut in a style Hermione didn't recognize, elegant, severe, threaded with veins of emerald that caught the dim light like serpents, coiled in silk. At her side stood a figure cloaked in darkness, featureless at first, until the image shifted and the hood fell back. Voldemort. But not as she had known him. The monstrous serpentine thing of her nightmares. This was different. Younger. Still human. Still beautiful in a way that made her stomach twist. His face was pale, angular, almost noble, his dark eyes alight with something that wasn't malice. Not quite, something colder. Calculated. And beside him, her reflection stood not as prisoner, not as victim, but as partner. The woman reached out, her hand brushing his sleeve with an intimacy that made Hermione recoil. Not affection, no, not that. But understanding. Complicity, as if they had built this world together, stone by stone, curse by curse. No, Hermione whispered, her fingers pressing against the glass, cold seeping into her skin. That's not me. That's not possible. The mirror did not respond. It never did, but the image deepened, unfolding like a memory not her own. She saw herself in a vast hall lined with statues of serpents, speaking in measured tones to a crowd of bowed heads. She saw herself turning away from Harry's outstretched hand. Harry, younger, his face twisted in betrayal, walking instead toward the man who had once been Tom Riddle, who now stood at the head of a silent throne. You could have stalked it, the reflection said. Her voice, Hermione's, and not hers, layered like echoes in a tune. But you didn't. You saw the order in the chaos, the clarity in his vision, and you chose it. I would never, Hermione choked out, stepping back, her ear catching on a broken tile. She fell to one knee, but her eyes never left the glass. I would die first. Would you? The reflection asked softly. Or would you rationalize, justify? Convince yourself that power in the right hands, his hands, your hands, could rebuild the world without war, without chaos. You already feel it, don't you? The pull? The fascination. Hermione closed her eyes, but the image remained burned behind her lids. Tom's voice, low and precise, discussing arithmancy as if it were poetry. The way he looked at her, not with lust, not with cruelty, but with recognition, as if he had been waiting centuries for someone who could meet him mind to mind. The dangerous thrill that curled in her chest when he smiled. When she opened her eyes, the mirror was still, empty, just her own pale face, staring back, wide-eyed, trembling. But the question lingered, colder than the stone beneath her. What if the mirror wasn't showing her a warning? What if it was showing her a future she had already begun to want? Rain lashed against the high-arched windows of the abandoned Charms classroom, streaking the glass like silver tears. The air hummed with the residue of old magic, thick and cloying, as if the very walls remembered the spells once cast within. Hermione's fingers trembled around her wand, not from fear, though fear was there, coiled tight beneath her ribs, but from the weight of what she was about to do. On the long oak table before her, Tom Riddle's research lay splayed open. Journals bound in black leather, ink-scarred pages filled with elegant looping script, diagrams of temporal fractures, and incantations that twisted the laws of nature into something dark and malleable. She had read them all. Late into the nights, by candlelight, she had traced his logic, followed the fevered brilliance of his mind as he sought to crack time itself. And she had seen it. The moment, the precise keystone, where his theory could be undone. One spell, reversed. One sigil erased. In the mirror world, this warped reflection of Hogwarts suspended between seconds would collapse. Tom entered without sound, as he always did. One moment the room was empty. The next he stood in the doorway, his dark robes dry, despite the storm outside. His eyes, black as polished obsidian, flicked from the scattered papers to her face. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice low, almost gentle. "I have to stop this," Hermione whispered, her own voice raw. "This isn't just research, Tom. This is a weapon. You're trying to rewrite everything. And what if I am?" He stepped forward, slow, deliberate. "What if the world is flawed? What if it deserves to be unmade and reforged? It's not yours to remake," she said, lifting her wand. "I've seen what you're planning. You don't want to fix time. You want to control it, to erase everything you find inconvenient." The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "And do you think destroying my work will save it? Do you think ignorance is protection? It's better than tyranny." The air between them cracked. A chair exploded into splinters as a curse flew past her ear, slamming into the wall behind. Hermione dropped to the floor, rolling, shielding her face from the debris. She scrambled to her feet, heart hammering. "You don't understand," Tom said, advancing. "I've seen the future through your eyes. I felt the world that forgets me, that fears my name. I will not be a footnote in someone else's history. And I won't let you become its destroyer." She cast first, a severing charm aimed at the stack of journals. Paper flared, pages tearing midair, but Tom flicked his wand, and the spell rebounded, searing her shoulder. Pain flared, bright and sharp. She gasped, but held her ground. Another curse, a binding hex, snaked toward him. He deflected it with a twist of his wrist, countering with a jet of emerald light. She barely dodged, the beam carving a molten scar into the stone floor. "You fight for a world that will never accept you," he said, voice cutting through the chaos. "You are an anomaly, Hermione, a ghost in a machine, just like me." "No," she said, breathless, circling. "I'm not like you. I don't want power. I want balance." "Balance?" He laughed, cold and hollow. "There is no balance, only order, or chaos, and I have chosen order." He lunged, not with a spell, but with his hand outstretched, fingers closing around the nearest journal. Hermione reacted on instinct. "Diffindo." The pages tore apart, ink bleeding into the air like smoke. Tom froze. For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. Not rage, not calculation. Something raw, wounded. "You don't know what you've done," he whispered. And then the room began to tremble. Cracks spider-webbed across the floor. The mirror on the far wall, the one she had arrived through, shattered from within, though no hand had touched it. A low groan echoed through the castle, as if Hogwarts itself were mourning. Tom turned to her, face pale, voice quiet. "You've broken the anchor." Hermione stared at the ruin of the research, the splintered mirror, the storm beyond the glass. "I had to." "No," he said. "You didn't understand. That wasn't just research. It was the only thing keeping us from unraveling." Rain lashed the astronomy tower, as if the sky itself wept for what was about to unfold. The mirror, ancient, silver-framed, its surface like liquid mercury, shivered between them, trembling with the weight of two wills, two worlds, two hearts caught between salvation and ruin. Hermione's fingers hovered inches from the glass, her breath shallow, her pulse echoing in her throat. Across from her, Tom Riddle stood motionless, his dark eyes reflecting not just her image, but something deeper, something fractured, yearning. "It doesn't have to end like this," she said, voice barely louder than the wind. "We can stop it, together." Tom smiled then, but it wasn't the cold, calculated curve she'd come to fear. It was uncertain, real. "And what would we be stopping, Hermione? The past? The future? Or simply the truth?" The mirror rippled. A spider web of cracks bloomed across its surface, thin and bright as lightning frozen in ice. Each fissure pulsed with a low hum, vibrating through the stone beneath their feet. The air tasted metallic, thick with magic on the verge of collapse. Around them the castle groaned, a deep, mournful sound, as though Hogwarts herself sensed the fracture about to tear her soul in two. She reached out, so did he. Their fingers didn't touch, but their magic did. A wave of light erupted, white and gold from her, black and crimson from him, colliding in the mirror's heart. The world split, and then silence. Not the absence of sound, but the silence of a breath held across time. Hermione stood in a corridor she knew and didn't know. The banners were Gryffindor red, but the torches burned with an eerie blue flame. Students passed, their faces familiar, yet their eyes were hollow, their laughter too loud, too sharp. A prefect with Lily Evans' hair sneered at a cowering first year. The air smelled of chalk and damp stone, but beneath it, something rotten. This was not her Hogwarts. This was what might have been. She turned, heart-hammering, and saw the other side of the mirror. Tom stood in a ruined courtyard, overgrown with thorny vines that pulsed like veins. The sky above was bruised purple, split by silent storms. Statues of serpents coiled around broken pillars, their eyes glowing faintly. A single raven perched on a shattered clock tower, watching him. This was not the future he had dreamed of. This was the future he had earned. Their eyes met through the fractured glass. "I see it now," he whispered, voice echoing as if from far away. "Not the world I wanted. The world I made." Hermione pressed her palm to the mirror. "Then, unmake it. I don't know how." "Yes, you do. You always have." The cracks widened. The two timelines strained against each other. One where he had walked the path of power, where love was weakness, where control was godhood. The other, hers, where he had vanished into history, a monster before he could become a man. But between them, in the splinters of the mirror, flickered something else. A third possibility, fragile, unwritten. She felt it, the pull of her own time, her friends, her world. But letting go meant leaving him here, in the ruin of his choices. And he felt it too, the chance to step into her world, to start again. But to do so would be to erase everything. To deny the boy who had been lonely, brilliant, afraid. "I could come with you," he said, voice raw. Not as he was, not as he became, but as someone new. "And what would that make you?" she asked. "A ghost in my world? A shadow of a life you never lived?" He looked down at his hands. "Maybe. But maybe I could learn to be more." Tears streaked her cheeks, cold against her skin. "I don't want a ghost, Tom. I want the man who could choose differently." The mirror trembled. One final crack split down the center. The timelines pulled apart, and then silence again. But this time it was broken by a single, soft chime. Like a clock striking 12, like a choice being made. The air tasted of dust and old parchment, thick with silence that pressed against Hermione's eardrums, like the hush before a storm. She opened her eyes to a sky that wasn't a sky. No sun, no stars, only a soft, directionless glow seeping through the high-arched windows of the entrance hall. The stones beneath her were cold, but not wet, and when she pushed herself up, her fingers sank slightly into the floor, as if the marble had the consistency of firm clay. She gasped and jerked her hand back. It came away unmarked, but tingling, as though she'd touched something alive. Hogwarts stood around her, familiar and yet profoundly wrong. The banners hung motionless, their colors bleached to shades of silver and gray, as if seen through fog. The torches flickered, but not with flame. They pulsed like slow heartbeats, casting light that moved in ripples across the walls. It reminded her of water disturbed by a stone, the glow undulating in slow, deliberate waves. She took a step forward. The sound of her footfall didn't echo. It was swallowed, absorbed. She tried again. Nothing. Her breath fogged in the air, but the vapor didn't dissipate. It curled, suspended, like smoke caught in a jar. "Hello?" Her voice emerged, thin, frayed at the edges, as if stretched over too great a distance. No answer, not even a whisper. She moved toward the grand staircase. The steps shifted when she wasn't looking. She'd blink, and the landing would be farther away, or closer, or the staircase itself would be spiraling in a direction it never had before. She reached for the banister, and recoiled. It wasn't wood. It was glass or ice, smooth and humming faintly beneath her touch. When she looked down the corridor, toward the great hall, the door shimmered, half there, half not, like reflections seen through a rippling surface. Time didn't feel right either. It wasn't linear. It pooled. She remembered. She had been in the Department of Mysteries, standing before the ancient mirror in the forgotten wing. The runes around it had flared when she spoke. The incantation, a spell she'd pieced together from half-ruined texts, meant to glimpse the past. But the glass hadn't shown history. It had opened, and pulled her in. She pressed her palm flat against the wall. The stone vibrated softly, rhythmically. A heartbeat. The castle was dreaming. Then, a sound. Footsteps, measured, calm, coming from the corridor to her left. She turned, heart hammering, and saw him. He emerged from the silver haze, like a figure, stepping out of a painting. Tall, dark-haired, his school robes immaculate. His face composed, almost serene. Tom Riddle, younger than the portraits she'd seen, younger than the memory in the diary, but undeniably him. His eyes, dark and fathomless, locked onto hers. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried, cutting through the muffled stillness like a blade through silk. "I didn't mean to come," Hermione said, forcing steadiness into her voice. "I was trying to understand time, the mirror." "The mirror doesn't show time," he interrupted. "It shows what time forgets." He stepped closer. The air between them thickened, charged, as if the space itself resisted his movement. "You're bleeding through," he said, tilting his head slightly. "From the other side, I can see it in your edges. You're not solid. Not yet." She looked down at her hands. Along the edges of her fingers, a faint shimmer ran, like light refracting through water. She hadn't noticed before. "What is this place?" she asked. He smiled then, small, knowing, chilling. "It's the world between, where reflections go when no one is looking. Where time doesn't flow, it drips." He reached out, not touching her, but hovering his hand near her wrist. She felt nothing, and yet her skin prickled, as if anticipation were a force all its own. "If you stay," he said, "you'll dissolve, become part of the echo. And if I leave," his gaze held hers, "then someone must pay the price to open the way back." Silence stretched. The torchlight pulsed. Somewhere deep in the castle, a bell rang, once slowly, as though tolling through water. Tom lowered his hand. "You shouldn't have come, Hermione Granger." She froze. "How do you know my name?" He didn't answer, just stepped back, into the haze, his form blurring at the edges, until he was gone, leaving only the echo of his words, hanging in the thick, motionless air. Rain tapped a quiet rhythm against the leaded windows of the abandoned prefect's bathroom, each drop echoing like a heartbeat in the hollow silence. Hermione stood barefoot on cold stone, her breath fogging the cracked surface of the great mirror that dominated the far wall. It wasn't the mirror of Erised. It wasn't any mirror she'd ever seen. Its frame was carved with serpentine runes that pulsed faintly, like veins beneath pale skin. She'd found it behind a false panel in the library's restricted section, hidden beneath layers of dust and forgotten spells. And now it showed her two versions of the same face. Tom Riddle stood on either side of the glass. One was as she remembered him, sharp-featured, composed, with eyes like polished onyx. He wore his prefect badge with effortless arrogance, a smirk playing at the corner of his lips. The other, older perhaps, or merely worn, stood hunched slightly, his fingers pressed against the glass as if trying to reach through. His eyes were red-rimmed, shadowed, and when he spoke his voice cracked. "You don't belong here," the first one said, smooth as silk. "But you're useful all the same." The second Riddle flinched. "Don't listen to him. He's not real. Not the way I am." Hermione stepped back. "What is this?" "A choice," the cruel one said, tilting his head. "One version of history. Two possible outcomes. I'm what happens when ambition is met with clarity. He's what happens when weakness interferes." "I'm what happens when he lies," the other snapped. "I tried to stop it, Hermione. I saw what I would become. I tried." She froze. "How do you know my name?" "Because I've studied you," the remorseful Riddle said, voice trembling. "I found your writings, your notes in the margins of old spellbooks. You're trying to go home, aren't you? But the mirror doesn't let you leave until you see the truth." "And what truth is that?" she asked, arms wrapped around herself. "That there was a moment," he said. "A single moment in 1943, when I stood over Myrtle's body and felt something. Not guilt, not yet. But hesitation. And in that moment, I could have turned back." The other Riddle laughed. A low, mirthless sound. "You sentimental fool. Hesitation is just fear in disguise. I embraced what I was. That's why I'm stronger. That's why I am real." Hermione pressed her palm to the glass. The surface rippled like water. "But which one of you is in this world? Which Tom Riddle walks these halls?" The remorseful one looked down. "I am, or I was, until he broke free. He's a memory," the first one said, stepping forward. "A ghost of a path not taken. I am what the mirror crowned. I am what this world chose." She shook her head. "No, that doesn't make sense. If you're a memory, how can you speak? How can you touch the glass?" "Because regret has weight," the broken Riddle whispered. "And mirrors don't just reflect. They remember. They show what was, what could have been, and what still might be. A cold wind stirred the room, though no window was open. The runes flared, and for a moment the two figures flickered, merging into one face, half serene, half anguished, before splitting again. "You want to go home," the cruel Riddle said. "I can help you, but you'll have to let go of your illusions. There's no redemption in power, only truth." The other reached for her, his voice urgent. "Don't believe him. The way back isn't through surrender, it's through understanding. The mirror responds to choice, real choice, not force, not control." Hermione's chest tightened. She thought of the Tom Riddle she'd known in her own time, the diary, the charm, the coldness beneath. Was this second version possible? Could remorse have lived in that heart, even briefly? Or was this just another trap? She looked from one face to the other, and realized with a shiver that she no longer knew which one frightened her more. Rain tapped against the stained glass windows of the abandoned astronomy tower, each drop a whisper against centuries of silence. The mirror stood, cracked but intact in the alcove, its silver surface now clouded like breath on glass. Hermione traced the fraction lines with trembling fingers, feeling the pulse beneath, weak, erratic, like a dying heartbeat. The spell to repair it required balance, not just magic, but intent, and she had to choose who would wield it. Tom stood by the window, his silhouette sharp against the storm-lit sky. He hadn't spoken since they'd climbed the tower, but his presence was a weight, constant and undeniable. He wore his school robes like armor, the prefect badge gleaming dully on his chest, though this was no ordinary Hogwarts. Here the corridors remembered him as king. The air bent to his will. Even the stars seemed to pause when he turned his head. "You still believe you can go back," he said at last, voice quiet, almost gentle. "I have to," she replied. "My friends, my world needs me." "And what if your world is already gone?" He turned then, eyes dark and knowing. "Time doesn't forgive reversals. Hermione, you know this. Every choice fractures something. You return and the mirror shatters. You stay, and it heals. But only if we act together." She looked at him, really looked. Not the boy who would become Voldemort, not the monster history painted, but the young man before her, brilliant and wounded, haunted by loneliness, so profound it mirrored her own. He had built this world not out of malice, but out of need. A place where he was not feared, where he belonged, where power was not a curse, but a birthright. "And if we fix it together?" she asked. "What then?" "Then the mirror chooses," he said. "It reflects truth, not memory, not desire, but what we truly are. If we are meant to be apart, it will send you home. If not—" He stepped closer. "If not, then perhaps the truth is that we were never meant to be on opposite sides." The wind howled through a gap in the stone, carrying the scent of damp earth and old magic. Hermione closed her eyes, remembering Harry's laughter, Ron's stubborn loyalty, the warmth of the common room fire. But she also remembered the cold silence of the library at midnight, the way no one truly understood the weight she carried. Here, Tom understood. Not just her mind, but the ache behind it. "You would change," she whispered. "If we stayed, you'd have to." "I already have," he said. "You think I don't feel it? The pull towards something else? You've unsettled me, Hermione. You've made me question what I thought was inevitable." She opened her eyes. "Then prove it." He didn't hesitate. Drawing his wand, he placed it point down into the stone floor. "I renounce the oath I made to myself, the one that said power was the only truth. I choose uncertainty. I choose you." The mirror flared. Light erupted from the crack, spiraling outward in ribbons of silver and shadow. The tower trembled. Hermione staggered, but Tom caught her hand, his grip firm, warm. The magic swirled around them, pulling at their memories, their fears, their deepest longings. Images flashed. Hermione dancing in the great hall, Tom reading by the lake, the two of them walking through Hogsmeade, laughter caught in the winter air. A life that could have been, a future unwritten. Then silence. The mirror was whole, but it no longer reflected the room. Instead, it showed two paths diverging in a silver mist. One led to a familiar castle, bathed in golden light, her Hogwarts. The other faded into shadow, but within it, she saw Tom's face, softer, older, waiting. "You must choose," the mirror seemed to whisper. "Not with your mind, with your heart." Tears slipped down her cheeks. She had spent her life believing in logic, in right and wrong, in the certainty of cause and effect. But love was not a spell to be reversed. It was a choice, made again and again. She stepped forward. The library's silence was not empty, but thick, like dust, caught in sunlight, suspended between breaths. Hermione sat cross-legged on the cold stone floor, her back against a shelf crammed with grimoires whose titles shimmered and shifted when unobserved. Before her, etched into a scrap of blackened oak salvaged from the ruins of the Charms Corridor, were runes that should not exist. They pulsed faintly, a rhythm beneath the skin of the wood, like a heartbeat buried deep in stone. She had seen these symbols before, in forbidden texts sealed behind glass in the restricted section, but never like this, never breathing. She traced one with the tip of her finger, flinching as warmth flooded up her arm, not of fire, but of memory. A child crying in the dark, a hand, small, pale, reaching for a door that wouldn't open. She pulled back, gasping. These weren't just ruse. They were vessels. They respond to intent. She whispered, more to herself than the shadows. Not syntax, not incantation. Feeling. The air shifted behind her. A presence, quiet but undeniable. She didn't need to turn to know he was there. "You're reading them wrong," Tom Riddle said, voice smooth as ink on parchment. He stepped into the dim halo of her floating witchlight, robes falling like shadow-given form. His hands were bare, fingers long and precise, the hands of a scribe or a surgeon. "You're trying to solve them like equations. They aren't mathematics. They're confessions." Hermione didn't look up. "Then why are they written in Elder Futhark, with Sumerian modifiers and traces of Parseltongue syntax?" "Because language is a cage," he said, kneeling beside her with unnatural grace. "And pain needs a shape to escape." She dared a glance. His face was calm, but his eyes, dark, fathomless, flickered with something raw. Not anger. Something closer to hunger. Not for power. For understanding. "These runes," she said slowly, "they're not just symbols. They're anchors. They bind emotion to matter. Someone carved their grief into this wood. And it remembers." Tom tilted his head. "And what does it say to you?" She hesitated. "Loneliness. Not just absence. A kind of betrayal. As if the world refused to see them. As if they were always standing just outside the light." A silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. Then, almost imperceptibly, Tom exhaled. "Accurate." She turned fully now. "You know who made them. I was there when they were carved." Her breath caught. "You? No," he said, voice low. "Not me, but someone I resembled." She studied him. The controlled set of his jaw, the way his fingers curled slightly, as if used to clutching something that was never given. "You're not like them," she said softly. "Not entirely." He smiled then, but it didn't touch his eyes. "Aren't I? You keep searching for the man I might have been. But what if I'm exactly who I was always meant to be? Then why help me?" she asked. "Why show me this place? Why unlock the mirror archives?" He looked at her, truly looked, and for the first time she saw not the predator, not the future tyrant, but a boy who had learned too early that love was conditional and trust fatal. "Because you see the runes," he said. "You hear what they say. No one else ever has." Her chest tightened. This was the crux, the fragile hinge upon which everything balanced. Not magic, not time, understanding. She reached for the wood again, but this time she didn't analyze. She closed her eyes, breathed. Let the echo of sorrow rise through her fingertips, not to dissect but to witness. And then, softly, she spoke, not in Latin or Aramaic, but in the language of recognition. "I see you," she whispered. "I hear you. You're not a line." The runes flared, once bright as a struck match, and then dimmed. The wood cracked down the center, and from the split rose a wisp of silver smoke, coiling like a sigh. It hovered between them, trembling, before dissolving into the air. Tom didn't move. His face was unreadable, but his hand, resting on the stone, trembled. Just once. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, voice barely audible. "Why not?" she asked. "Because now," he whispered, "you know how to break me." Rain tapped against the stained glass windows like whispered secrets, each drop echoing through the abandoned astronomy tower. The mirror stood cracked at its center, jagged lines spider-webbing from its heart, pulsing faintly with a silvery light that flickered like a dying breath. Hermione traced the fractures with trembling fingers, the cold glass humming beneath her touch, resonating with something ancient and sorrowful. "It's not just a mirror," Tom said from behind her, his voice low, measured. "It's a tomb, a prison. It remembers what was, what might have been, and it holds onto them both." She turned to face him. He stood in shadow, his black robes clinging to his frame like ink spilled across parchment. His eyes, dark, fathomless, held no fear, only calculation. But Hermione had learned to read the subtle shifts in him, the slight tightening at the corners of his mouth, the way his breath stilled when he was unsettled. He was afraid, not of death, of forgetting. "They used to bind souls to objects," he continued, stepping forward. "Not with dark incantations, but with sacrifice. A piece of oneself given willingly, anchored to memory. The mirror needs a witness, one who remembers both worlds." Her stomach dropped. He knew. "I suspected." He tilted his head, studying her. "The magic here isn't broken, Hermione. It's hungry. It wants balance. To restore the rift, it demands equilibrium. One soul to carry the weight of both timelines." She backed away, shaking her head. "No, there has to be another way. A countercharm, a reversal. And you've found none." His voice softened. "You've read every book in the restricted section. You've deciphered the runes on the frame. You know the truth as well as I do." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the ceaseless rain and the mirror's faint rhythmic pulse. She thought of Harry's laugh, Ron's terrible jokes, the warmth of the common room fire. She thought of her parents, their faces blurred now by time and distance. To return, truly return, meant leading someone behind. "What if we both refuse?" she asked. "Then the mirror collapses," he said, "and both worlds fracture. Yours fades into myth, mine becomes a hollow echo, forever out of step with reality." She closed her eyes. "You're asking me to choose. I'm asking you to understand," he corrected. "This isn't about power, not anymore. It's about memory, about legacy. Someone must remain not as a prisoner, but as a guardian. The mirror will remember through them." She looked at him then, really looked. Not the boy who would become Voldemort, not the monster history painted, but Tom, brilliant, lonely, burdened by a mind too sharp for the world that forged him. He had never been given the chance to be more, and now, perhaps, he was offering one. "You'd do it," she whispered. "You'd stay." He didn't answer at first. Then quietly, "I have nothing to return to. My world is already a reflection. Yours still burns with life. That doesn't give you the right to decide for me," she said, voice breaking. "You don't get to sacrifice yourself, like it means nothing." "It means everything," he said, stepping closer. "For the first time, I'm choosing something that isn't mine. I'm choosing for you." Tears blurred her vision. "And what if I choose to stay?" His breath caught. "You have more to lose." "Maybe," she said. "But maybe I found something worth losing it for." The mirror flared, its light surging, as if sensing the shift in intent. The air thickened, charged with magic older than Hogwarts itself. Somewhere deep in the castle, a clock struck 12, though no clock had worked in this version for decades. Tom reached for her hand. His fingers were cold, but his grip was firm. "Then let us decide together," he said, "not as prisoner and savior, as equals." The mirror began to sing, a low, haunting melody woven from forgotten voices. And in that moment, standing at the edge of two worlds, Hermione realized the cruelest truth of all. To return home, someone had to become a memory. The air in the abandoned astronomy tower was thick with the scent of old parchment and damp stone, the only light a sliver of silver moon cutting through the cracked glass of the high window. Hermione stood with her back to the wall, arms wrapped around herself, watching Tom Riddle, where he sat on the edge of the broken telescope platform, one long leg drawn up, the other dangling over the edge. He hadn't spoken in nearly 10 minutes, and the silence was worse than any spell. "You don't belong here," he said at last, voice low, almost gentle. She tensed. "I know that." "No," he corrected, turning his head slightly, his profile sharp in the dim light. "You don't understand. You don't belong anywhere in this world, not because of time or magic, but because you see too much. You question everything. That makes you dangerous. That makes you like me." Hermione swallowed. "We're nothing alike." He let out a quiet laugh. "Humorless. You scold me for my ambition. You accuse me of cruelty. And yet you've spent weeks unraveling the magic of this place, risking exposure, risking himself." He gestured vaguely toward the castle below, where the younger students slept, unaware of the storm gathering in their midst. "Just to go back to a world that doesn't know you're gone. That's not duty, that's obsession, just like mine." She opened her mouth to argue, but the words died. Because he wasn't wrong. "I've watched you," he continued, voice softening. "The way you pause before answering in class, not because you don't know, but because you're weighing how much to reveal. The way you flinch when someone mentions blood purity, not out of fear, but disgust. Moral disgust, as if you've seen what it leads to. I've seen you read books no one else touches, search for patterns in things people dismiss as coincidence. You don't just want knowledge, you want truth." He stood then, slow, deliberate, and turned to face her. "When I first saw you, drenched, disheveled, speaking with that sharp, certain voice, I thought you were a challenge, a puzzle to be solved, a rival to be outmaneuvered. I believed you were like the others, someone who would either bow or break. And now," she whispered. "Now I know you're not a rival," he said. "You're a mirror." She shook her head. "A mirror shows what's already there. You don't know me." "No," he admitted. "But I know the loneliness, the certainty that you're different, not just in skill, but in kind. That everyone around you speaks a language you learned, but never truly feel. I've lived with that my whole life. And then, you came, and you looked at me. Not with fear, not with flattery, and not with the hunger. So many have, but with recognition." Hermione's breath caught, "And I felt seen," he said, the words barely audible. "Not as Tom Riddle, prefect, prodigy, orphan. Not as the boy who can charm professors and terrify first years with a glance. But as someone who dreams of a world remade, not just for power, but because the current one is so broken. You saw that, didn't you?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her chest ached. "That's why I didn't turn you in," he said. "That's why I helped you. Not because I hoped to use you, though I told myself that at first. Because for the first time I wasn't alone in the dark." A cold wind slipped through the cracks, rustling the loose pages of her notes. Outside, the forbidden forest shifted like a living thing beneath the moon. "Do you know what terrifies me most?" he asked, stepping closer. "It's not death. It's becoming what they all expect me to be, the monster, the outcast, the villain, without ever having chosen it. And you look at me like I still could be something else." Hermione lifted her eyes to his. In that moment she didn't see the Dark Lord. She saw a boy, brilliant, afraid, aching for something he couldn't name. "I don't know if I can change what you become," she said, voice trembling. "But I know I've seen the man who could." He closed his eyes, a single breath, then silence. And in that silence something fragile and possible took root. The air in the Chamber of Secrets crackled with the residue of magic, thick as storm clouds pressing against stone. Hermione stood at the edge of the shattered mirror, glass like frozen breath scattered across the floor, each fragment still pulsing faintly with silver light. Tom stood opposite her, his wand lowered, chest rising and falling with slow, measured breaths. The ritual was done. The words had been spoken, the blood drawn, hers and his mingled upon the ancient runes carved into the serpent-mouthed pedestal. Now silence, not empty, but full, charged with something vast and unspoken. "It worked," Hermione whispered, more to herself than to him. Tom didn't answer at once. His dark eyes traced the contours of the chamber, as if seeing it anew. The torches, once sputtering green, now burned clear in gold. The serpent carvings along the wall seemed less menacing, more ancient, almost mournful. The air smelled of damp stone and something else. Ozone, perhaps, or the faint musk of time realigning. "I can feel it," he said at last. The weight, shifting, like a veil pulled back. Hermione stepped forward, careful not to cut her bare feet on the glass. She reached out, hesitantly, and pressed her palm against the largest remaining shard. Warmth spread through her fingers. Not fire, but life. A heartbeat. The mirror wasn't just showing reflections anymore. It was remembering. Images flickered beneath her touch. Hogwarts as it was. Towers rising under a noon sun. Students laughing on the lawn. But also Hogwarts, as it could have been. Tom in robes of crimson, not black, standing beside Dumbledore in the great hall, their hands clasped in alliance. A world where he never feared death, where love wasn't a weakness, but a choice. She gasped, pulling back. "You saw it too," Tom murmured. She nodded, breath unsteady. "You were different." "Not different," he corrected softly. Whole. A silence settled between them, fragile as breath on glass. They had done the impossible, merged the fractured realities, not by destroying one, but by weaving them together. The mirror world, with its twisted timelines and hidden truths, had not been erased. It had been absorbed, integrated. And now, the past and the possible, breathed in the same air. Hermione looked at him, really looked. The boy who would become Voldemort stood before her. Yes, but so did the boy who had once loved arithmancy puzzles and read poetry in the shadows of the library. The boy who had smiled at her, genuinely, when she solved his riddle about the basilisk's true name. "Do you feel it?" she asked. She changed in. He exhaled, long and slow. "I feel lighter," as if a whisper, I've carried since childhood, has finally gone quiet. She stepped closer. "Then it's not too late." His eyes met hers, dark and searching. "You still believe that?" "I have to." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You always did, didn't you? Believe in people, even me." The ground beneath them trembled, softly, like a sigh. Above, the stone ceiling rippled, and for a moment the stars shone through, not the enchanted ceiling of the great hall, but the real night sky, vast and ancient. The castle was remembering, healing, and then faintly, a sound, distant, impossible. Laughter. Children's laughter, echoing from the corridors above. Tom turned toward the sound, his expression unreadable. "They're back. The others?" Hermione whispered. "All of them." He looked at her then, and something passed between them, words unspoken, promises unmade, but understood. This world was not the one she came from, and was something new. A third path, not fate, not destiny, but choice. She reached for his hand. He let her take it, and together they walked toward the surface, toward the light, toward a future neither had dared to dream. Rain lashed the towers of Hogwarts like cold fingers scraping stone. Inside the mirror chamber, the air hummed with a dissonance that made Hermione's teeth ache. The great silver surface, once still as frozen breath, now rippled like a wound in reality, pulsing with streaks of violet and black. Cracks spiderwebbed across its face, each fissure leaking whispers in languages she didn't know, voices layered over one another in a chorus of warnings and weeping. She stepped back, her boots scraping on the cracked flagstones. "It's collapsing," she murmured, more to herself than to him. Tom Riddle stood close, too close, his silhouette sharp against the struggling light. He didn't flinch. "No," he said, voice low and certain. "It's not collapsing, it's remembering." The storm outside wasn't natural. Thunder rolled not from clouds, but from the walls themselves, as if the castle were groaning under the weight of 2 times pressed together. Books exploded from shelves in the corridors beyond, pages fluttering like panicked birds. Portraits screamed as their frames twisted, some vanishing entirely, others merging. Dumbledore's face flickering over Phineas Nigellus, then a younger man with Tom's eyes. Hermione clutched her wand, but it felt wrong in her hand. Too light, as though its magic had been siphoned. This was never supposed to happen. The anchor charm should have held for another 12 hours. "And yet," Tom said, stepping toward the mirror, "you assumed the rules of your world applied here. Arrogant Granger. But I suppose that's what makes you interesting." She turned on him. "Don't pretend this isn't your doing. You pushed the ritual too far. You wanted to see what lay beyond the glass, what you could take." He didn't deny it. His fingers hovered over the mirror's surface. "I wanted to see her," he said so quietly. She almost didn't hear. "My mother, just once." "Is that so monstrous?" The confession struck her like a physical thing. For all his calculated cruelty, For all the distance he kept between himself and the world, there was a boy in there, starved for love, for proof that he'd ever been wanted. She swallowed. It's not monstrous, but time isn't a doorway. It's a river, and we've dammed it with our hands. Lightning split the sky, and the mirror screamed. Not a sound. It couldn't have been a sound, but a vibration that tore through bone. Hermione dropped to her knees, hands pressed over her ears. The chamber warped. The floor tilted. For a heartbeat she saw two worlds at once, the crumbling castle around her, and another Hogwarts. Whole, golden children laughing in the courtyards, anners snapping in a warm breeze. Her Hogwarts, and then it was gone. Tom staggered back, blood trickling from his nose. "It's pulling," he said, voice ragged. "Something's on the other side. Something hungry." She forced herself up. "The anchor's failing. If we don't close the rift, both timelines will unravel, will cease to have ever existed." He looked at her then, really looked, at her frayed sleeves, the dark circles under her eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw. "You'd save me," he said, wonder and disbelief tangled in his tone. "Even knowing what I'll become. I save people," she whispered. "It's who I am, even when they won't let me." Outside, the sky turned the color of old bruises. Stones cracked from the ceiling. A bell began to toll, one that hadn't rung since the fall of the castle in her time. Hermione reached for his hand. "We close it together, or we vanish together." He hesitated, the boy and the monster warring in his eyes. Then slowly he took her hand. The mirror shuddered, the world screamed, and the two of them stepped forward, into the light, into the void, into the silence that comes before the end. The glass gave no sound as she stepped through, only a ripple, like breath across still water, and then the cold weight of the real world settled over her skin. Stone corridors, torch-like flickering in iron sconces, the scent of old parchment and damp stone. Hogwarts, but not her Hogwarts. This one bore the quiet hush of a place caught between breaths, as if time itself hesitated to move. Hermione turned, heart hammering, and reached back toward the mirror. It stood whole now, its silvered surface unbroken but dark. Empty. "Tom?" Her voice was a whisper, too fragile for the silence. No answer. She pressed her palm to the glass, cold, solid, a wall. The spell had worked. The fissures in the mirror, sealed by the convergence of their magic, her knowledge of temporal theory fused with his mastery of ancient enchantments. Together they had mended the breach, but had he come through, or had the moment of passage torn him from existence like a page burned from a book? The breeze stirred behind her. Impossible in these enclosed halls. She turned sharply. The corridor was empty, yet the air shimmered faintly, like heat above stone. Then a shadow detached itself from the darkness near the tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy. Tall, poised, eyes catching the torchlight like polished onyx. Tom Riddle stepped forward, not a ghost, not a memory. Flesh and blood, or something close enough. "You doubted I'd follow," he said, voice smooth as poured ink. "I doubted you'd survive it," she answered, breath unsteady. "The mirror. It wasn't meant to carry two. Yet here we are." He studied her, head tilted slightly. "Or perhaps I am. This world, it feels thinner than the one we left. Like a painting over stone." Hermione swallowed. That was it exactly. The colors were right, the shapes familiar, but something was dulled. The magic, perhaps, or the soul of the place. Was this her past, her future, or just another reflection, one layer deeper than the last? She looked down at her hands. Still hers, still real. The book she'd carried through, theoretical thaumaturgy of mirrored realms, was tucked beneath her arm, its pages unburned. "You kept it," Tom noted. "I kept everything," she said. "Even the things I shouldn't have." A faint smile touched his lips. Not cruel, not quite. Something quieter. Something she hadn't seen before. The boy who read alone in the library. The one who flinched at loud voices. The one who once asked her, in the dim light of a shattered tower, "What if I had been worth saving?" Now, he looked around. This isn't 1943. The wards are different. The stars, wrong alignment. "It's not your time either," she said. "I think the mirror didn't send us back. It sent us aside. A variation, a possibility. Then we are ghosts in a world that doesn't know us, or gods in one that does." He met her eyes. "You're afraid." "Of course I am." Her voice cracked. "I don't know what we've done. I don't know if we can go back. And I don't know if I want to. If this world is safer without him, without you." Tom went very still. "Say it. Say what you've always thought, but never dared." She did. "I saw the man you could have been. And I mourned him." The silence stretched. A moth fluttered past, drawn to the flame. Then, softly, "I remember the night you cried in the library, over a passage about redemption. I read it later. I didn't understand why it moved you. And now?" He looked at her, really looked. "And for the first time there was no mask. Now I think I do." Outside, the sky began to lighten, not with the gold of dawn, but with a pale, uncertain gray. The castle groaned, settling into a new rhythm. Hermione took a breath. "We don't belong here, but we're here. And if we're to survive, if we're to choose anything at all, then we start now." Tom nodded once. "Then let us begin." And together they walked down the hall, two shadows in a world not their own, stepping carefully through the fragile glass of what might still be. Cold stone pressed against her cheek, the scent of damp earth, and old magic sharp in her nostrils. Hermione stirred, every muscle protesting as if she'd been folded in on herself for centuries. Her fingers twitched, brushing against the smooth surface of the mirror, or what remained of it. It lay beside her like a dead thing, its silver backing dulled, the glass cracked in a spiderweb pattern from corner to center. No ripple, no breath of warmth, just silence. She pushed herself up slowly, her robes stiff with frost, her breath curling in pale wisps before her. The hall of prophecy stretched around her, silent and cavernous, rows of glass orbs glittering faintly in the dim greenish light. She was back, truly back. The realization settled over her like a weight, not relief, not yet, but a hollow disbelief. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the steady thud of her heart, grounding herself in the now. It had been, how long? Days? Weeks? Time had bled together in the mirror world, stretched and warped like candle wax in firelight. She remembered the ivy-choked towers of the other Hogwarts, the way the sky never quite turned proper night, always hovering in a bruised twilight. She remembered the silence of that place, not peaceful, but watchful, as if the castle itself were holding its breath. And she remembered Tom. His voice came back to her in fragments, low, precise, the cadence of a man who knew exactly how much power a single word could hold. The way he'd looked at her when she'd spoken of mercy, as if the concept were foreign, almost amusing, and yet the hesitation in his hands when he'd helped her decipher the runes beneath the mirror chamber. The way his eyes had flickered just once, when she'd told him the future didn't have to be written in blood. She swallowed hard, fingers brushing the cracked glass again. Had any of it been real? Or had it all been a manifestation of the mirror's magic? A projection, a temptation, a warning? A faint creak echoed through the hall. Hermione stiffened, turning her head. Shadows shifted between the towering shelves, but there was no one. Just the whisper of air through ancient stone. Still, her wand was in her hand before she fully registered, reaching for it, its familiar weight, a small comfort. She stood, legs unsteady, and took a step forward. Then another. The Department of Mysteries was unchanged. Dust lay thick on the floor, undisturbed, but for her own footprints. The time room's door stood ajar, its gears stilled, everything as she'd left it, except for her. Because she was not the same. She had gone into the mirror seeking answers, a way to mend the fracture between worlds, to return before the temporal backlash consumed her. But what she'd found was not just a forgotten magic, but a man, a boy, who could have been anything. Who might still be, in some other thread of time. And she had hesitated. She had stood at the threshold of rewriting history, wand raised, the mirror's heart pulsing beneath her spell, and she had faltered, because she had seen, beneath the ambition and the cold brilliance, something fragile, a flicker of doubt, a question. What if I could choose? He had asked. She had not answered. Now, standing in the silence of the present, she wondered if she ever could. A tear slipped free before she could stop it, tracing a warm path down her cold cheek. She didn't wipe it away. Somewhere, deep in the ruins of that other world, Tom Riddle might still stand before a shattered mirror, staring at a reflection that no longer showed him power, but possibility, and she hoped, against reason, against history, that it was enough. The first time it happened, Hermione thought it was a trick of the candlelight. She was scrubbing ink from her fingers in the lavatory off the slithering common room. Tom had insisted she stay close, under his watch, for her own safety, though she suspected it was more about control than care. The water ran cold, and as she rubbed at a stubborn blot near her knuckle, she saw it, a faint, silvery line etching itself across her skin like a vein of moonlight beneath the surface. It pulsed once, then faded, gone as if it had never been. She stood frozen, hands dripping, breath shallow. It wasn't ink. She stared at her reflection, her face too pale, her eyes too wide, framed by hair that refused to obey the mirror world's humidity. This wasn't her reflection, not truly. The girl in the glass wore the same robes, the same expression, but something in the tilt of her chin, the set of her mouth, felt subtly wrong, like a portrait painted from memory. That night, she dreamt of glass cracking. The second time, she was in the restricted section of the library, tracing a passage in an old text on dimensional echoes. Her fingers hovered over a line about mirror-bound souls leaving imprints upon the flesh, when the air in the room thickened. A chill crept up her arm, not from the draft, but from within. She looked down. Runes, 5 of them, angular and archaic, flared to life along her forearm. They burned with no heat, glowing faintly blue before dissolving into nothing. She gasped, jerking back, knocking a stack of books to the floor. Footsteps echoed down the aisle. "Still up, Granger." Tom's voice was smooth, almost amused, but she knew better than to mistake calm for kindness. He stepped into the gap between shelves, tall and immaculate, in his dark robes, his eyes glinting like polished onyx. "You'll wear yourself out chasing shadows." "These aren't shadows," she said, rolling down her sleeve with deliberate care. "This place is leaving marks on me." He tilted his head, studying her. "Marks?" She hesitated. Lies were dangerous with him. He could smell deception like blood in water. "I see things. On my skin, runes. They appear and vanish." He didn't laugh, didn't scoff. Instead, he reached out, slow, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His fingers brushed the inside of her wrist, cool and precise. "The mirror binds to its traveler," he murmured. "It remembers, and it speaks." "How do you know that?" she whispered. "Because I've seen it before," he said, his voice dropping, almost reverent. "Years ago, a man who fell through a shattered scrying pool. He bled runes for 3 days before he died." Hermione's stomach twisted. "Am I dying?" "No." His thumb traced a slow arc over her pulse point. "You're changing. The mirror is rewriting you, piece by piece, adapting you to its truth. That's not possible. I'm still me. Are you?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You've been here 3 weeks. You eat their food, breathe their air, speak their lies. You even dream in their time. How much of you is still from your world, I wonder?" She pulled her hand back. "I remember who I am, for now." He stepped closer. "But the runes, they're not just marks, they're memory. The mirror is trying to tell you something. About where you came from, about where you're going, and you're helping me why." His gaze held hers. "Because I want to know what the mirror sees when it looks at you. And because—" he paused, just for a breath. "Because I've never seen it speak to anyone who didn't belong." Outside, thunder rolled across the hills. The candle flames flickered, casting long, wavering shadows on the stone walls. Hermione felt the weight of centuries pressing in, the silence between them thick with something she couldn't name. Then faintly, beneath her skin, the runes stirred again. Rain tapped against the high windows of the Ministry of Magic, a steady rhythm like fingers drumming on glass. The air smelled of damp parchment and old stone, mingling with the faint ozone scent of active spells down the corridor. Hermione Granger stood just beyond the threshold of the Department of Mysteries, her breath shallow, her fingers curled around the edge of a folded note. Its ink, smudged, its origin unknown. It had appeared in her coat pocket that morning, slipped there without witness. He knows you're here. Ask about the silver door. She hadn't told Tom, not yet, not because she didn't trust him, though that too was true, but because she wasn't sure she trusted herself. The Tom Riddle of this world was not the boy history remembered. He was sharper, colder, a mind honed to a blade's edge, and yet there were moments when his voice softened over a passage in Magic Mosty Evil, when he paused mid-lecture to watch the way light fractured through a crystal prism. In those seconds something flickered behind his eyes, something almost human. And now this. She turned the corner into the records corridor, where floating lanterns cast long shadows across rows of archivists bent over scrolls. The air grew colder with each step, and she pulled her cloak tighter. Then she saw him. He stood at a waist-high counter, dark hair combed back neatly, robe simple but well-kept. He held a quill poised over a ledger, but his eyes were what stalked her. They were Tom's eyes, the same deep obsidian hue, but where Tom's held a stillness like a frozen lake, this man's were warm, alive, like embers in ash. He looked up, and for a heartbeat she forgot how to breathe. "You're staring," he said, not unkindly. "I," her voice caught. "You look like someone I once knew." A common curse, I'm afraid. He smiled, small and tired, though I've been told it's more of a blessing in certain circles. Name's Cassian Riddle. Ministry researcher, Department of Arcane Reflections. Her pulse stuttered. Riddle. That's an old name, she said carefully. Old and thin on the ground, he replied, closing the ledger. Most of the line faded out before the last century. What's left? She studied him. The slope of his nose, the shape of his jaw. The resemblance was uncanny, but it wasn't just bone and flesh. It was the way he tilted his head when listening, the precision of his diction, and yet, where Tom was all coiled tension, Cassian seemed open, unafraid of silence. You study reflections? She asked. Mirror magic, mostly. Echo spells, spectral returns, that sort of thing. Fascinating field, full of half-truths and almost realities. He glanced at her. You're not from records. No, she admitted. I'm with the Historical Enquiry Office. A flicker in his gaze. Not suspicion, recognition. You're looking for the silver door, aren't you? Her blood turned to ice. What do you know about it? It's not in the records, he said, lowering his voice. But it was mentioned in a confiscated text, burned in 39, supposedly. Except I found the fragment, talked about a mirror that didn't reflect, replaced. Said it swallowed a girl whole in 1942. She never came back. Hermione's breath stilled. 1942, the year the chamber opened. The year Tom opened it. Do you believe it? She whispered. I believe, he said, meeting her eyes, that some doors open both ways. And some people aren't who they seem, not even themselves. A silence stretched between them, fragile as glass. Then he reached into his coat and withdrew a small silver key, no longer than her thumb. This was in the fragment's appendix. I wasn't sure what to do with it. Now I think, maybe I was waiting for you. She took it, cold, heavy. Why give it to me? Because, he said softly. I've seen your face in the mirrors too, and you always look lost. Outside, thunder rolled through the sky, and somewhere, deep in the bones of the ministry, a door, silver, unseen, waited to be found. The mirror stood at the end of the abandoned corridor, taller than any door, its frame carved with serpentine runes that pulsed faintly in the dim torchlight. Hermione stepped toward it barefoot, the cold stone floor biting at her soles, her breath shallow. She had spent weeks avoiding this moment, weeks of slipping through the shadows of this backward Hogwarts, learning its rhythms, its silences, the way the staircases moved like slow, dreaming beasts. But now, standing before the glass, she could no longer delay. Her reflection appeared as it always had. Brown hair frayed from restless fingers, eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. But something was different. The girl in the mirror smiled, not the polite tilt of lips she offered in passing, nor the grim determination she wore when facing another riddle of this world. This was a smile that knew secrets. It was soft. It was sad. Hello, Hermione, the reflection said, voice like water over stone. She flinched. You're not me. No, the reflection agreed. But I know you. I've been watching. You've been searching for a way out, haven't you? But you keep looking in the wrong places. Hermione's fingers curled into her palms. What do you mean? You see this world as a prison, the reflection murmured, stepping forward until her image pressed against the glass like a hand against ice. But it's a memory. A wound. The mirror doesn't show what was. It shows what might have been, if someone had chosen differently. She thought of Tom Riddle, how he had found her 3 nights ago in the restricted section, not with suspicion, but with a quiet intensity that unsettled her more than any threat could. He had asked her about logic, about ethics, about the nature of time, not as a weapon, but as a question, as if he truly wanted to know. You're drawn to him, the reflection said, almost gently. That's impossible, Hermione whispered. He's a monster? Or a boy who hasn't yet decided? The air in the corridor thickened, and the torches flickered, casting long, wavering shadows. For a moment, the mirror didn't reflect the hall at all. Instead, she saw a younger Tom, 12 years old, standing alone beneath a gray sky as the train pulled away from the platform. His face was unreadable, but his hands trembled at his sides. Then it shifted, a classroom. Tom at 16, writing in a journal, his quill pausing as he looked up, as if sensing her gaze. The words on the page glowed briefly. If I could change one thing, would I still be me? Hermione stepped back. This isn't real. It's more real than you think, the reflection said. The mirror doesn't trap you, it reveals. You came here not by accident, but because a part of you needed to see this, needed to understand that even the darkest paths begin with a single choice, often a quiet one, a word not spoken, the hand not reached out. She thought of the Tom in her time, the cold, hollow thing that called itself Lord Voldemort. But this Tom, this brilliant, lonely boy who quoted Aquinas in Latin and asked whether love could be logically proven, felt terrifyingly human. What do you want from me? Hermione asked, voice breaking. The reflection's smile returned, tinged with sorrow. Not me, you. You want to go home. But you also want to believe he could have been different, that any of us could have been different. The mirror shows you both truths at once, and now you have to choose. Do you save the past, or do you accept it? The glass shimmered, and for a heartbeat she saw 2 versions of herself, one stepping back, turning away, clutching her time-turner like a shield, the other reaching forward, hand pressed to the mirror, tears in her eyes. Outside, down the hall, footsteps echoed, deliberate, unhurried. Tom was coming, and she still hadn't decided what she would do. The ink bled slightly at the edge of the page, smudged by a thumbprint she didn't remember leaving. The candle on the windowsill flickered, casting long shadows across the stone wall, making the words tremble as if alive. Outside, snow fell in hushed spirals over the frozen lake, turning the grounds of this mirrored Hogwarts into a world of breathless white. It was quiet here, too quiet, like the castle itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. Hermione pressed the quill harder, forming each letter with deliberate care. She had rewritten the note 3 times already, not because the words were complicated, but because they were true. "Dear me," she began, then paused. It felt absurd, addressing herself like a stranger, but she wasn't the same girl who had stepped through the mirror weeks ago. That Hermione had believed in clear lines, right and wrong, good and evil, fate and free will. Now she wasn't so sure. The lines had blurred, not from weakness, but from seeing, really seeing, what lay beneath. If you're reading this, you've made it back. Or you're about to. Either way, remember this. Tom Riddle is not the man you think he will become, not yet. And that doesn't make him innocent. It makes him human. She exhaled, the breath curling in the cold air. She could still hear his voice from earlier that evening, low and measured as he stood by the library fire, discussing Plato's theory of forms, like it was nothing. Like the weight of centuries didn't hang between them. He had looked at her, truly looked, not as a threat, not as a puzzle to be solved, but as someone who saw him, not the mask he wore for the professors, the prefects, the ministry hopefuls, but the boy who read ancient texts by candlelight, who flinched when thunder cracked too close, who once whispered, "I don't believe anyone has ever told me they were proud of me." She had not known how to answer. The quill scratched forward. "He's capable of terrible things. I know that. You know that. But love isn't about excusing what someone might do. It's about understanding why they might choose it. And sometimes understanding is the first act of change. A knock at the door. Soft, precise. 3 taps. She didn't need to ask who it was. "Come in," she said, voice steady. The door opened, and Tom stepped inside, black robes falling straight against his frame. Snow dusted his shoulders. His eyes moved to the letter, then to her face. "You're leaving a message," he said. "Not a question." "For myself," she replied. "A reminder." He stepped closer, but didn't take the paper. "And what does it say?" "That I was wrong," she said. "About you. About so many things." He looked away, toward the window. "You still believe you'll go back?" "I have to. And if I asked you to stay..." The air thickened. The candle guttered. She met his gaze. "Then I'd have to ask you why." He didn't answer, not with words. But in the silence she saw it. The flicker of fear, of wanting, of something raw and unguarded, the part of him that hadn't learned to bury it yet. She finished the letter with one last line, her hand trembling only slightly. Change doesn't begin with grand gestures. It begins with a single moment of honesty. "This was mine. I hope it leads to yours." She folded the parchment, sealed it with wax, and placed it inside the spine of a borrowed book. The Principles of Temporal Magic, the one he'd given her last Tuesday. If she returned, she would find it. If she didn't, perhaps someone else would. Tom stood by the window, watching the snow. "Do you think time forgives?" he asked. She walked to his side, close enough to feel the warmth of him. "No," she said. "But I think it listens. And sometimes, that's enough." The mirror cracked with a sound like frozen glass giving way beneath a boot. Hermione stood frozen, breath caught in her throat, as the silver surface shimmered one final time, ripples spreading outward from her reflection. Only it wasn't her anymore. The face staring back wore her eyes, her brows, but the expression was softer, distant, as if remembering a life she'd never lived. Then, with a sigh that seemed to come from the stones themselves, the mirror exhaled. The hum that had pulsed beneath the castle's floors since her arrival, the low, constant vibration like a heartbeat trapped in stone, faded into silence. It was over. She reached out, fingers trembling, and pressed her palm against the now cold surface. No resistance, no pull, just glass ordinary and still. The connection had snapped, not with violence, but with finality. Behind her, the air stirred. Footsteps, measured and unhurried, echoed across the chamber. She didn't turn. She already knew the shape of his shadow, the way it fell across the floor, long, precise, never wavering. "You felt it too," Tom Riddle said. His voice was quiet, almost reverent. The thread snapped. Hermione nodded, still staring at the mirror. "It's gone, the way back." "And yet," he said, stepping beside her, "you don't seem afraid." She turned then, meeting his gaze. His eyes, dark, fathomless, held no triumph, no cruelty. Only a stillness that unsettled her more than any threat ever had. "I'm not sure I ever truly wanted to go back," she admitted. "Not after seeing what I've seen, not after knowing." You looked away, his expression unreadable. "You saw the boy I was, the one buried under layers of ambition and certainty. I thought I knew myself. But you..." He paused, as if searching for words that had no right to exist on his tongue. "You made me remember things I'd decided were irrelevant. Kindness, doubt. The weight of a hand on my shoulder when no one had ever touched me like that before." She remembered the orphanage, the cold room where young Tom had learned to flinch at shadows. She remembered the way he'd hesitated before casting his first spell, not from fear, but from wonder. She remembered how, one rainy afternoon in the library, he'd read aloud from a Muggle novel, his voice softening at the words of a character who chose mercy. "You're not him," she said gently. "Not anymore, but he's still in you. I've seen it." He laughed then, a quiet, broken sound. "And what if he is? What good is a ghost when the world demands a king? The world doesn't have to demand anything," she whispered. "Not from you, not from anyone." For a long moment, they stood in silence. The castle around them felt different, lighter, as if the very walls had been holding their breath. Dust motes drifted in the pale light filtering through high windows. Somewhere above, a portrait coughed, then resumed snoring. Tom reached into his pocket and pulled out the small, silver locket she'd once known as a Horcrux. He turned it over in his fingers. "I was going to destroy it," he said. "Not for redemption, not for you, but because I realized, when I looked into that mirror and saw your face, not as it is, but as it might have been, I didn't want to live in a world that required this." He dropped the locket into her palm. "I don't know what happens now. This world, this time, they're not yours. But if there's a way to stay, I'd like to try." Tears pricked her eyes, not from sorrow, not from joy, but from the unbearable weight of choice. She closed her fingers around the locket. "Then we find a new thread," she said, "even if we have to weave it ourselves." And somewhere, deep in the bones of the castle, the stones seemed to sigh, not in protest, but in agreement. The air in the mirror, Hogwarts, tasted different, thicker, older, as though time itself had congealed into something almost tangible. Hermione stepped forward, her boots silent against the obsidian tiles of the entrance hall, which arched into a vaulted ceiling that didn't reflect the sky, but a slow, swirling nebula of silver and violet. No torches burned here, yet the walls shimmered with a cold internal luminescence, like the breath of ghosts caught mid-exhale. She wrapped her arms around herself, not from cold, there was none, but from the weight of being seen, not by eyes but by the castle itself. It knew her. Or it knew the version of her that belonged here, if such a version existed. She had left the Department of Mysteries behind, its shattered glass, its dying runes, the echo of Tom's voice, calling her name not in anger, but in something closer to sorrow. But his shadow remained, not on the floor, but in her mind, stretched long and quiet across the memory of his face when he realized she might not come back. Not because she couldn't, but because she shouldn't. The mirror had not sent her to the past. Not exactly. It had sent her to a branching path, a Hogwarts that had grown sideways instead of forward, where choices had curdled into certainties. Here, the portraits spoke in riddles, and the staircases moved, only when you stopped trying to understand them. The students wore uniforms, edged in gray, their ties knotted with precision, their smiles measured, and at the center of it all, Tom Riddle walked untouched by time, 17 and already more than mortal. She had kissed him once, not in passion, but in defiance, a desperate attempt to prove that even a soul half-drowned in darkness could flicker with warmth. And for a moment, just a breath, he had flinched, not away, but inward, as if startled by the sensation of being felt. Not used, not feared, felt. Now, walking these halls without him, she wondered if that moment had been real, or merely another reflection, another trick of the glass. The library loomed ahead, its doors carved with serpents that blinked in unison as she approached. She paused, pressing her palm to the wood, warm, alive. The same library, and yet not. Here the restricted section wasn't locked, it was invited. A velvet rope hung across it, studded with silver runes that whispered as she passed. "Enter, seeker." Truth as teeth. She stepped inside. Books floated in mid-air, pages turning slowly, like lungs breathing. No dust, no silence, just the soft rustle of knowledge waiting to be misused. She reached for one, The Alchemy of Self, and the moment her fingers brushed the spine, the entire room shifted. The shelves rearranged themselves into a spiral, and at the center, a mirror stood, tall and unframed. Its surface, not glass, but liquid mercury. It showed her, but not as she was. This Hermione wore black robes lined with green, her hair looser, her eyes harder. At her side stood Tom, not as a boy, but as a man, whole, radiant, terrifying. And they were not enemies. They were equals, partners. The world behind them was whole. No war, no ashes, just a new order, built on logic, control, and a love that demanded absolute surrender. She stepped back, heart pounding. "No," she whispered, "that's not me." The reflection smiled. "Isn't it? You wanted to save him. You still do. I want to understand," she said, voice firmer. "There's a difference." "Is there?" the mirror murmured, not in sound, but in thought. "You came here to return home. But what if home is the lie? What if this choice, this balance? is what you've always hungered for. Power without cruelty. Love without loss. A world remade not by destruction, but by design. She closed her eyes. The real Tom, her Tom, had never asked to be saved. He had asked to be seen, and she had seen him. Not the Dark Lord. Not the orphan, but the boy who read Aristotle in the dead of night, who healed a wounded sparrow with a spell no textbook recorded, who once told her, "I don't believe in second chances. I create inevitabilities." And she had believed him. When she opened her eyes, the mirror was clear again. Just her, just Hermione. Alone she turned and walked out of the library, the serpent door sealing behind her like a tomb. The castle watched, the air thickened, and somewhere in the depths of Slytherin Tower, a clock with no hands began to chime. She wouldn't go back the way she came. She would walk forward.